Today brings together members of CEA's Board of Directors, as well as CEA members from our various councils and committees, our corporate partners, and energy stakeholders from Ottawa and across North America. Nous sommes vraiment contents d'accueillir certains d'entre vous en personne à Ottawa pour la première fois en 2 ans. J'aimerais aussi souhaiter la bienvenue à ceux qui suivent la diffusion du sommet en direct. L'activité d'aujourd'hui réunit des membres du conseil d'administration de plusieurs conseils et comités de la CEA, ainsi que des représentants de nos entreprises partenaires et des parties prenantes du secteur de l'énergie d'Ottawa et de partout en Amérique du Nord. We have an action-packed agenda for you this afternoon, discussing the key theme, there is no 2050 without 2030. Today, we'll begin with a presentation by Dr. Michael Weber, followed by a panel discussion about the 2030 prosumer. We will pause for a short health break and resume for our second panel entitled 2030 Electricity Company Model for Future Success. And we'll finish our afternoon festivities with a presentation by Susannah Pierce from Shell Canada. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. The QR code on your name badge will direct you to our event website, where you can find the biographies of all of today's speakers. And if you have any question about some of our COVID-19 precautions, please visit the registration desk just outside. Both of our keynote speakers and our 2 panels will welcome discussions from the audience today. Please signal to our CEA staff if you'd like to ask any questions to them. Thanks to Rexall Utility, we can offer Wi-Fi throughout the event. Wi-Fi is available under Rexall with the password CEA123. Finally, if you have other questions, please feel free to ask any CEA staff members. You can find us by spotting the green lanyards that we're all wearing today. Avant de commencer, j'ai quelques notes administratives. En scannant le code QR qui figure sur votre porte-nom, vous aurez accès au site web du sommet, où vous trouverez la biographie des conférenciers d'honneur et des panélistes qui prendront la parole aujourd'hui. Si vous avez des questions concernant certaines des mesures de précaution que nous avons prévues en raison de la COVID-19, veuillez vous rendre à notre bureau d'inscription. Nos conférenciers d'honneur et nos panélistes se feront aussi un plaisir de répondre aux questions des participants aujourd'hui. Si vous souhaitez poser une question, n'hésitez pas à vous adresser à un des employés de la CEA. Grâce à la commandite de Rexall Utility, nous pouvons vous offrir une connexion Wi-Fi dans l'ensemble des locaux où se tient le sommet. Le nom du réseau est Rexall et le mot de passe est CEA123. Enfin, si vous avez d'autres questions, n'hésitez pas à vous adresser aux employés de la CEA. Vous pouvez nous trouver en réparant les cordons de badge verts que l'on porte tous aujourd'hui. Finally, we also hope you can all join us for dinner this evening, where we'll celebrate our annual awards winners and enjoy a discussion from the debaters live. I'd now like to invite the outgoing chair of the CEA Board of Directors, Mike Marsh, to the stage.
Thanks very much, Eric. You know, it's really, really great to be here today. After 21 months of lockdowns, closures, travel restrictions, masking, vaccinations, and who knows what else in your respective areas. It hasn't been easy, but we made the adjustments, and we do appreciate the little things like being able to get back together again. So thank you so much for attending here today. I was pleased to formally begin as chair 2 years ago, and due to COVID, I had yet to really join a CEA event in person until today. And that said, it'll also be my last event, as I look forward to retiring from SaskPower and, of course, from CEA at the end of December. And I'll be turning the reins over to Ken Hartwick from OPG as of the end of December. I'd like to just take a couple moments now and just recognize the board of the CEA, and I'd like all the board members who are in the room today, and I think we have about 11 or 12, I'd like them to stand so everybody can see who you are, please. stand. I think they need a round of applause. We had 24 board members on the call this morning. Of course, half of them were virtually. And we think, that's going to be the way of the future. There's going to be more and more hybrid type conferences like this. But I just wanted to recognize the board and the great team that I've had the pleasure of working with for the last 2 years. I've been on the board for 7 years now. And prior to that, I've held various positions on the Distribution and Transmission Council. So that takes me back 14 years with the CEA. I also want to recognize all the CEA staff team here today. I'd like you to all stand, please. I think these are the people that really help put an event like this together, and I want to thank each and every one of you for all the work you have done, not only keeping us on track with meetings throughout the year, but finally being able to organize an event like this. Thanks very much. I'd like to not hold up the program any longer, so I'd like to ask Verna McGregor from the First Nation Algonquin community, who will join us for a greeting and land acknowledgement, please.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everybody. Verna Nidishikas Kitagansi bin don't Jabba August Nido Demishichunim Kipanesi. Can anybody translate that? I say Mono c'est Verna, c'est je reste à Kitagansibi, j'aime ça, j'étais ici aujourd'hui. I'm Verna McGregor from Kitagan-Zibi, which is 120 kilometers north here of Ottawa. Ottawa-Gatineau forms part of our traditional unceded lands. What does unceded mean? It means that we never signed treaty, similar to the number of treaties out west for the land here. And for us, I'm very honored to be here today too as well, because we were known as, and we still are known as, Omamaninawa, which means the nomads. And we had such wide territories. Why? Because if you stayed in one place, you overharvest the animals and the resources. So when I say Wagush, Nedodem, Ashishonimki Panesi, Wagush is my clan on my mother's side. Nimki Panesi, which is Thunderbird, is a clan on my father's side, because our clan system was based on the watershed. And we would meet here in Ottawa in the summers to talk about what's going on the land. And we were known for the birch bark canoe. And I do a lot of climate change conferences too, and I say, we travel carbon free too. So, but that's why I said, but with the Ottawa River watershed, there's 52 dams that were built on the Ottawa River watershed. And it changed the currents and connection to the water, in addition for us with the creation of the reserve system. And then now we have this whole talk of reconciliation. So really quickly, I'm here to do an opening prayer, but really quickly, I'll just tell you a really quick story. In 2015, Ottawa Hydro came to Kitagan-Zibi to consult, because there's this duty to consult, which is affirmed in these Supreme Court cases. So during our discussion, I mentioned, the elders have been talking about for over 40, 50 years that when the dam was built here in 1904, there was no environmental assessment. So what happened is it wiped out the species, the American eel. There was also talk about that there was once salmon too in the Ottawa River, because the Algonquin word for salmon is Odawajameg, Ottawa Odawajameg. So I said, so when you're upgrading this dam, I know it would be nice to return the rivers to its original state, but look at the population that's grown around this dam, and will be also disturbing the ecosystem that adapted to the building of the dam. Is there a way, like for example now they have like a fish elevator that you could bring in and maybe return that species. And that was also, so what happened is they packed up and they left. And, but then 2-3 years later, we were called back to a meeting with the river keeper, and they had an engineer do a presentation, and she was a female engineer, and she started talking about that. They did install a fish elevator. And she said, you know, when I was installing that too, it was like the baby eels became like my babies, so they augmented the grade of the fish elevator so that they can pass. And I was thinking, oh, that's where the female energy comes in too with this industry. And for us too as well, when I was saying that too as well, this reconciliation is not just about the newcomers coming to our lands too. Reconciliation goes deeper than that. It's also what we as humans have done to all the other species too. So on that note, I was given the tobacco, which was part of protocol when asked to do something like in spirit. Tobacco is the first gift given to us from Creator, so we use it in ceremony. And again, with the coming of this capitalism, it became a good to be traded. And my brother used to say, he goes, you know, the people that go to bingo, when you're allowed to smoke in the bingo halls, he goes, they sure pray a lot when they go to bingo. So, why the tobacco too is when we have the sacred fire, it's our connection from the spirit world to the unseen world. So you offer the tobacco to the fire to pray that you do good things, and that it was foretold too that there will be a need for an awakening in the times we are today. And if you look at what our relatives, what's happening in BC, I said that's why we also need prayer for guidance. So on that note, I'm going to say a little prayer, and I have my eagle feather. And one of the significance of the eagle feather is that it's a messenger, that it flies highest to Creator to as it brings you messages of well-being. So I say, miigwech kajemane onje ni gashkito chama se konshe nongo mame kakina pamatsjik. Shwen mishnon nabigus miigwech onje kakina gagishan dano she mam de gain in the kimanon. Shkaki question kaso in the kimanon. We do kakina pamatsjik then as well gonje onje nagdu ablan kakina gochin in the kimanon. Miigwech onje kakina te kishu gon kises. To be kises a shitranang shak we do kwana nokmes nan onje nagdu abdan kakina goch nibi punksing saigan. Kichigagan, zibi ensak. We do kwagi kweg onje nagdu abdan kakina guch nibi. Miigwech onje ya ishkode kakimi shinchimin objetoyang. We do kwagin in a wagonje nagd onje mashkauj waj nagdu abdan kakina guch ishkode. Miigwech onje na sewen kakimi shin chimin opamadzian. We do kwag kakina pamadzjik does yakusajik mamu ya COVID-19 chin kadega. Kan sheshkwat ne gwede simen kego gejemane do shich kan noshkush ne gwede simen we do kwa kakina mam de gay na mashomse na ne gok nasana shich jin wen dagnak we do kwa kakina mam de gay we wisne jik de magsjik we wisne jik kaya we giwe jik shwen mishno mia miigwech. So I'll point to somebody to translate in the room. No. I'm just saying thank you, and I thank the 4 elements of creation, which is the earth, the water, the fire, and the air. And I think I'm giving thanks to all our relatives, and that I'm asking that you guide you well in the work that you do. And I specifically also focus on the water, because in our understanding is women are keepers of the water and men are keepers of the fire, and it's that balance and the need for balance. And why are women keepers of the water is also too as well because in our culture they're known as the life givers. They bring in the next generation. And when you're about to give birth, to bring in new life, you break the water. And the men, again, it's the spark of life. So it's that balance. And the biggest teaching is also that we're here for the next 7 generations. And that's why we also need to look after the water and all of the elements. So on that note, I wish you well, and I say, Chimigwech, merci. Thank you.
I'm now pleased to invite our panelists to the stage for the first panel. So please welcome Julie Lupinacci, our moderator and Chief Custom Officer from Hydro Ottawa, Jason McGray, the Deputy Director of the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative, Dr. Andrea Neusser, Director of Consumer Strategy at Hydro One, Mike Ballard, VP of Industry Strategy from Oracle Utilities, and Ellen Watts, Senior Director of Global Partnerships from Student Energy. As a reminder, that their biographies are available on our events website, and we will open to audience questions at the end.
Thank you. Hopefully it's on. Move this here. So I'm not as funny or as smart as Dr. Weber, so sorry in advance. But it was a story that hit home because I had a very close friend of mine move from North Bay to Texas and had to weather that storm, and she was like, I can't believe this amount of snow has destroyed our system. So I got a lot of frontline views on that incident. So thank you guys all for coming. We've got a number of questions that we're going to go through, and you don't get to hear our bios and you don't get to hear a 5-minute speech from any of us, but hopefully you get some flavor through the questions. So I'm going to jump right in, and the first one is for you, Jason. So as customers become more engaged in the production and consumption of energy, what role should the Canadian electricity utility play in the 2030 and beyond?
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for having me. So when you talk about the consumer, the customer, one of the things that always has come to mind is that there isn't just one individual entity that can cover all different walks of life. In this room, in the conversations that I've had so far, we've talked about residential, but we've also talked about commercial and industrial, and within that space itself, you have these small businesses, the medium businesses, as well as the large-scale industrial that are taking that massive amount of load within a particular territory. The crypto mine, as mentioned previously, that's a totally different customer than a typical suburban home and what their energy use would look like. So within SECC, we use different segments that we regularly refine this survey every couple of years to ensure that we are actually talking about this particular group within the different value structure that they have. So with SECC, we have 4 segmentations that we use. We have our green innovators, our tech-savvy proteges, our movable middle, and our energy indifferent. And you can see on the screen, there's sort of a breakdown in terms of how that looks within both the consumer market segment as well as kind of where they are. And this is obviously a residential profile that we're seeing on the screen. So when it comes to any sort of options to try to motivate the consumer, how do you change their behavior? You have to have different messages for each of these individual groups because otherwise it's just not going to land. It's not going to be effective. It's not going to influence that change that you're trying for. So within this sort of scale, the green innovators, the tech-savvy proteges, they're definitely more the energy-engaged segment that you're going to find. They understand the value of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. The green innovators, it's definitely more of an emotional connection, whereas the tech-savvy proteges are really more of a prove-it. They're a bit more data-driven, which I know definitely appeals to a lot of the folks in this room. So that's where they're coming from in terms of whether or not they would take advantage of any program that might come into play from the utility. The energy indifferent is very, very much more the cost motivated group within this segment. So they are going to be looking for what is the savings. That's their change that they need to see in order to influence whatever program you're trying to get off the ground. The movable middle is sort of just that. They're very much the say but not always do group. So there might be a reason that they have an emotional connection to a program or a product offering that you guys are trying to get off the ground, but they may or may not take action. So you have to recognize as you reach out and try to target each one of these segments, how do you customize your messages? How do you change your outreach to these different groups to actually motivate that change? So it is interesting to see. We've also done a series of market message testing. And so a little bit of good news is that the message around electricity is getting cleaner and more renewable every year actually played well to all the different segments. That was the one message that we saw that really actively touched every single one of our groups. They all got it. They all felt that this was something that they could understand and resonate with. When we start talking about smart home technologies, as Dr. Weber mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity for data and automation that comes with working with the consumer, and certainly helping to motivate that change in a way that the consumer doesn't have to think about these things. That's where you start to see all these different groups really take into consideration. The Canadian audience definitely had a higher level of distrust when it came to data protection, so they were definitely more privacy-centric, and that's something that has to be taken into consideration if any and all messages go out for why you would want to take advantage of a smart home device or a smart home automation program. But by and large, it's something where you have these different groups that have different means of motivation. So you have to make sure that when you go and try to have these outreach opportunities, that you are really being mindful of what is the value structure that these groups are coming from to help custom and configure that message to actually talk to the consumer.
Thanks, Jason. And I think you're seeing a big convergence in all of these different pieces, and the last 2 years of COVID has definitely moved some of those people with regards to the technological comfort level, and being able to see how that is used. But there is still a lot of work to do, especially with the net zero goals ahead of us, and less than 10 years to hit some of these goals.
Yeah, so as you recognize that you've got a deadline, so to speak, recognizing that you also have to customize those messages in such a way that fit these different consumer segments that exist is going to make sure that it is a successful campaign or is not a successful campaign.
That's fair. And Helen is with the Student Energy. And Helen, what role does the next generation of homeowners have in moving behind the meter from an EV storage, self-generation perspective, and how are they reacting to those changing behaviors?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a great moment to kind of be here and speak to this because we actually just launched our Global Youth Energy Outlook just a couple weeks ago in Glasgow at COP26. And we're definitely starting to kind of crystallize, like, what are these kind of core value sets and maybe pain points in particular for the younger generation when it comes to, the track where we're on currently to adopt digitalization, electrification, decentralization at scale that young people are looking for. The biggest thing that we saw that is kind of the differentiating factor from what we're hearing maybe from governments and business for the most part is timelines. Young people do want this to kind of move faster and at scale. And so there was this big push that we saw in this Global Youth Energy Outlook for young people to have governments and business commit to achieving net zero by 2030. A big part of that, of course, will be mass scale up of electrification and digitalization, decentralization as well. And so I think, what we're seeing when we're talking about these goals to 2030 and then, beyond that to 2050 is how can we really create pathways for young people to work with these actors who are kind of setting the pace and scale right now with certain policies and commitments. How can we create pathways for young people to come in and really cement their core values into those decisions so that we have longevity and sustainability with the commitments that we're starting and making today. So young people, what we're seeing from the Global Youth Energy Outlook is a rise in public pressure to increase investment in infrastructure, so electric transportation infrastructure, and policies that make it affordable to participate in smart energy solutions, as well as decentralization. We're also seeing increasing pressure from young people on the areas of the system that need to change the most. So the regulatory environment, for example, young people are kind of thinking quite critically about, where are the barriers and the pain points that exist in making this happen faster and starting to really target their calls to action around that. They're also calling for more of a conversation around demand side reduction, and I think we started to hear that a little bit from Michael Weber's segment beforehand, but how can we really promote consumer behavior change? And this obviously is going to come from young people's behavior changing, but they're also very keen to kind of work with other generations on promoting more consumer behavior change intergenerationally as well. And that can be through conservation, smart technologies, but also just really promoting kind of mindsets that are thinking of more in a more circular way and promoting more conservation. And then finally, young people are really seeing this as a systems challenge. So when we have conversations like these, they really want to also be talking about how this transition can be an opportunity to address co-benefits in the energy system transformation. So how this can also be an opportunity to address things like gender equality, like climate and energy justice, as well as just transitions for existing workers, pollution and circular economy priorities as well. So we need to be kind of talking about this in a systems level way. Maybe the final piece that I'll note, because I think this is one of the most interesting data points that did come out of the Global Youth Energy Outlook, is around how young people, as they are kind of becoming this larger and larger voting bloc, young people of my generation, is the amount that they're prioritizing climate action plans in political candidates and political parties. So we saw, this is like quite interesting statistic, is we saw that 82% of young people indicated, and this was from a set of 41,000 respondents, 82% said that they would, their decision to vote for a political candidate or a political party would be impacted by their position on climate and energy issues and their commitment to a just energy transition. So that's something else to kind of put out there, is that I think we'll start to see some really interesting behavior change when it also comes to what policies are young people putting pressure behind, and how are they really factoring that into the elected officials that they support and put their weight behind.
Yeah, I really am inspired by the youth perspective on this, and Hydro Ottawa has been really taking a look at some of the work that's been done. And Mike, I know you guys have done some reports on the youth side too, so would love your perspective on that same question.
There we go, going right back to the beginning. I hope you guys have seen this slide. That's also a pleasure to be here myself. We actually spoke with the CEA a few months back about a survey that Oracle ran with about 4,500 end consumers around the world, of which 500 of them are based living in Canada. And the fundamentals of this insight was a massive, obvious generational trend towards issues around affordability, issues around interests in decarbonisation, preparedness to invest, preparedness to pay more. And this is a great little chart here, because whilst we talk about Gen Z right now, very super interesting, that Generation Alpha, if you've not met them yet, they're all about this high. They and Gen Z are going to be the ambassadors of this new energy future, okay? And the stats, unfortunately, for those of us that are, I'm nearly 50, and a few of us here are knocking on 50, 60, is that group is the hardest group to reach. And to your point, that there are immovable and movable groups, and it's super important for the industry, no matter whether it's in Canada or in the UK or anywhere else, that you understand who are going to be the ones that are going to generate that momentum, are going to generate the demand for solar generation, for batteries, for smart homes, for EVs. Because if you're burning time and you're burning dollars in your customer engagement programs, and you're talking to the wrong people about the wrong thing through the wrong channel, then that's wasted time. We don't have time to be talking to people who are not yet going to move. So our survey, and really it's bringing to light a lot of the points here, if we can move on to the next one, was around the propensity, the level of interest. So 83% of Canadian Gen Zs that we surveyed believe that their carbon footprint was more important to them now than it was 12 months ago. That's despite the fact, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on around affordability, that Gen Zs were by far the most impacted in terms of their need to stay home, their inability to work, their bills going up, their affordability of energy, but they still believe that it is far more important for, they're playing the long game. They recognize that they have larger, more strategic challenges. And what's also super interesting was that they are prepared to pay, more than 25% of Gen Zs in Canada were prepared to pay more than 25% on their energy bill to ensure that it came from a clean source. And so that little chart down there in the bottom, you can see the difference between the preparedness of young populations to pay more in order to achieve clean energy. But what's quite interesting, I also think, is if you look at the top right-hand corners, how well is the industry doing in actually talking to their customers about carbon footprint? So, 2/3 believe that it is the duty of their incumbent energy suppliers to help them become more carbon neutral, to reduce demand, and yet only 13% of those customers believe that their utility company is actually doing anything to help them at all. Okay, so, and that may not be the truth. That may be the truth in utilities, you're doing a lot more, but the perception of that being helpful is not prevalent. If we move forward to the next slide, just around this question of interest, direct load control. We talked a lot about using demand side management as a critical tool can unlock. There's a Brattle report that's come out very recently that explains how cheap and how fast you can achieve energy efficiency through direct load control far quicker than through wires-based alternatives. But direct load control is a really interesting one because 54% of Gen Zs and 40% of millennials were prepared to allow utilities to control this concern about data privacy, the concern around Big Brother is watching me, to exactly the point that was made earlier on. If the value is evident, if you can explain how this relationship with the utility is going to help you reduce your energy bills, reduce your carbon footprint, the interest is right there. The interest is there.
That's great, thank you. Did you have another point, Mike?
I could go on all day. I've got so,
I got that
so much
from our
data
preparation
here.
call.
There's so much data here. But I recommend we've got some reports that I think the CEA site have got. Have a look at them. It's really super interesting around how Canadian consumers are prioritizing decarbonisation over many other of their issues.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to the conversation we're going to get into now about customer affordability and the willingness to pay. So we definitely saw a very similar trend in some of our surveys with customers with regards to a willingness to make sure that it was a reliable stream, it's safe, but it's also going on that green stream. So we're starting to see that shift happening, and I think it's that convergence of policy, technology, and awareness that's happening, and I would agree, and both Andrea and I are nodding our head that we could do more in helping to educate the customers there. But looking at customer affordability as an issue, especially with inflation, as debt increases, 2030 is like right around the corner. So how do we balance that out with the increasing cost to decarbonize our economy and the increasing energy bills, especially when you're looking at, one segment of the market is probably the most okay with that?
So I will try and keep this very brief. If we go to the next little slide here, this is really, again, these are all going to be available. You can look at these at your leisure. But I think the fundamental part here is that it is the generation that are most likely to want to engage in new energy solutions that have been the ones in the last 2 years that have been most impacted. And the data speaks for itself in terms of the sacrifices that they've been prepared to make. But despite that, in the same survey, they are still recognizing that they are prepared to pay more for it to be cleaner. The real challenge, I think, here, which is, I think it's on this deck here, is that 71% said they would prefer their utility to help them with those future carbon solutions. That it's not, they don't want to have to go to the free market. There are so many things. We've just heard about, a dozen, and the speed at which they were coming out, it was a struggle even for us in the industry who's supposed to know what we're talking about to keep up with all of the evolutions of hydrogen, of energy storage, of carbon capture. There are so many ways in which end consumers could be getting engaged, whether it's, do I start with a smart thermostat? Is that best for me? Should I be putting solar panels on my roof, or should I be leasing them? When do I put a battery on? Do I put it on at the beginning? Do I put it on a bit later on when the prices have come down? There are, a myriad of providers and business cases, and every individual's circumstances, their building they live in, how much energy they produce, whether they live on their own or live with a family. It's an impossible task for an individual to be able to really make those best decisions. And as we said, 71% of Canadian energy consumers said they would rather go to their utility to get that advice. So one of the things we need to do in our industry is to start to consolidate those, not just the advice on where you can get support for paying your bill today, because there are a million ways in which the federal and provincial and local administrations provide assistance. But and that in itself is a fairly fragmented service. So utilities, first of all, start with helping consolidate advice to end consumers on their bills today, and then build their capabilities to be able to provide advice on where each customer should be focusing their energy. So I think it's incumbent on our industry to help demystify and to simplify the advice we're giving to customers, both on their bills today and on their bills in the future.
A number of us was talking right before lunch, and it's not just the residential, and I think Gen Zs and some of the millennials are really coming from their residential bills, but it's also the commercial customers as well are really coming and looking towards their utilities and asking, how do I go about doing this? 2030 is a daunting task to retrofit their buildings, to retrofit as a property developer, to retrofit apartments, right? And I'm thinking downtown core in some of the constrained areas. So Andrea, from the utility perspective, we had this wonderful dialogue, and I don't know if we can repeat it here, but let's talk a little bit about what can utilities do as a corporate citizen, right? And what had to decarbonize our own place, but also to help that decarbonization for our customers.
Yeah, I think an obvious place is to start with our own operations. We can look at supply chain. How can we decarbonize our supply chain? How can we green our buildings, our fleets, and so on? But that only does maybe a small piece. I think we have much more impact if we help our customers decarbonize and electrify, because enabling their solutions will be so much more impactful. And everything I've heard so far is music to my ears. Like, it sounds like customers want to hear from us, which is great, which means we have a lot of responsibility to do it, but also huge opportunities. So one of the key opportunities is, I think, help them navigate the space, as Julie, as you said. It's confusing. A lot of it is new. There's a certain sequence to how to do it best. In the most affordable way. So if we can provide that advice to different types of customers, I think that's really meaningful. And I think it's also key to understand who is where and where do we need to pick up our customers? Where are they on their journey right now? And how do we need to approach them? With what solutions? I think there's no point in offering the same solutions to all of our customers, even by segment, but really understanding where are our customers? What do they want? What are their values? What are their goals? How can we help them achieve these goals? What Dr. Weber said before, I think data will play a really important role. Understanding our customers better, understanding what they're going through, and offering them help, because we can demonstrate to them that we understand their energy usage, and we can also offer them some tools that help them better manage their own energy bills.
One of the things that we had done is ask a very simple question as we were visiting customers, and it was, what does your energy future look like, and what are you planning for? And it was very interesting, the amount of projects that were kind of released to our understanding that we hadn't factored into planning. Whether it was a brand new subdivision looking to go completely net zero, or if it was buildings that are looking to completely electrify in the next 5 to 10 years, and none of that was included in the planning. So I think there's an amazing opportunity to connect a little bit further down the decision-making tree with customers in all aspects. And then there's a really beautiful new business models that are becoming very apparent and maybe not so apparent, and you have to kind of work through them a little bit. But Hydro Ottawa had entered into a relationship with Zibi right here at the waterfront to be able to help them get to, and Kruger Products, which is just over on the Quebec side. So you have the interprovincial dynamic that's there, and using the steam from a manufacturing plant and bringing that steam over to be able to help support a new community utility. And so you may hear about that, and you may have already heard about that program, but it has garnered a lot of interest in the Ottawa area. It was one of the first in North America, and more developments, community developments, are looking to us saying, how can we do something similar? Now, they may not have a Kruger Products that in their ward or in their neighborhood to be able to tap into, but I think that's an opportunity for us to look at those different ways and those different business models. And then it also goes a little bit further, like the utility has to showcase, as has been mentioned a couple times, with regards to taking care of the environment. It's more than this, right? They're looking for safety, they're looking for reliability, they're looking at sustainability, but not for 4 years down. They don't have the government term in their head, right? They're looking a lot further ahead. They're looking multiple generations on how you're going to be supporting that. So I think it's incumbent on organizations in the utility sector to lead this, to be able to have an environmental aspect to their business. We launched a pollinator meadow, and we've done some work with Riverkeeper. They mentioned that in the opening remarks with the conversation that was had with regards to how we're going to do the retrofit of the dam. And I think those are really important questions to have, and although they add potentially some cost to it, I think they're important, and obviously the data is showing us that it's expected that that's the type of environmental stewardship that they're expecting from utilities. So thank you for that. I have to switch pages here because there's so many. So from a unique utility perspective, again, Andrea, I'm going to ask to you, how do you see your relationship with customers shifting 2030 and beyond? We're already starting to see that shift, but what does that look like 2030 and beyond?
I think we've started already, and we need to do more. I think we need to get away from seeing the typical utility customer as someone who pays their bill on time, has very few outages, and is generally satisfied with the service, to a much more proactive and engaged relationship. I think we need to almost move away from the satisfaction with the current service and really move towards a model that builds trust. Where we have, where we, again, show our customers that we understand them, that we're there for them, that we're trying to help them. Because in light of decarbonization, electrification, electricity will just play a much more important role in our customers' lives. And if we want to play this role, I think we need to earn the trust and do something to have this active relationship with them. And that includes this advisory role, again, showing them that we know them, that we have something to offer, that we have truly valuable services to offer, and not just the table stakes of delivering safe and reliable electricity. And we all know that's a lot of work already. So we need to get to this step that where customers really value what we offer. And at Hydro One, we're in the position where we are exchanging our smart meters over the next while. So we're trying to use that opportunity where we have to go to 1.4 million customers and knock on their door to really change that relationship with our customers by showing them, hey, we're here, we can give you some information. We want to tell you something about these new meters that have some interesting features. And really change the relationship with the meter, but also with the utility. And we talked a lot about demand response before. We also see it as an excellent opportunity to educate customers about it and potentially have them signal their willingness to participate in demand response and really build out our conservation efforts in that sense.
Well, and Dr. Weber said that they'll do anything for $1, so there's there's that opportunity as well. And I think there is an opportunity to dial into some of the data that we have on customers and usage patterns in a very different way. We've seen a lot of customers, link up their Nest meters and to their phones, and they're able to control a lot more from their house and their behaviors through that. And we're seeing that shift not just in the younger generations. And I know, Jason, you guys put together a report on some of how technology can be used. So we'll share a little bit about that with us.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, there's definitely a component of opportunity around smart home devices. And within the Canadian market, Canadians within our survey definitely cited a greater concern around privacy compared to those in the United States. But they're still willing to trust their provider. It's still something that you as utility industry is definitely building from a place of strength in that space, where compared to a direct third-party group, it's obviously, as you can see on the screen, little bit lower in terms of that acceptance rate. But yeah, people are definitely motivated by some of those opportunities to save. It doesn't take a lot from what we've seen in terms of our research to motivate that change. It's not you have to give away the farm, so to speak, to incentivize the right consumer behavior, but it definitely helps. And what we've seen in terms of getting the adoption for smart smart home devices, people really, they got that it was fun and easy to use. They had some issues in terms of the setup. That was definitely a learning curve component where, depending on who the individual was, where they fell in terms of that different segmentation of willingness to take that risk of going through the process, or it's too complicated, I'm not going to, I'd rather reach out to my utility to help set this process up. Bringing in the smart thermostats and the like, allowing for this connectivity within the home is certainly a great opportunity for utilities to take advantage of, but you have to have that right conversation with the right individuals to make sense to that, to encourage them that this is an okay thing to share your data. You're going to get some additional benefit out of that. And we certainly saw that between the different devices around, yeah, this is fun and easy to use, but I don't understand the connection with how it saves me energy and in turn saves my bill. And also, within the different devices themselves. Individuals around, the research around individual appliances, for example, was such where, yeah, they saw the value of saving energy, but they didn't want to spend the money on a smart fridge. Like, it didn't make sense to them versus their other appliance. So there has to be some way to help understand what the value is to the consumer in order to help get that benefit from the utility space. You can't have the platform working within your goals if people aren't buying into it. So it's really interesting to see, as we've collected more and more of this data around sort of that entry point, smart speakers, smart thermostats, that help lead to, oh, now I want to get smart lighting, now I want to get smart plugs, and now I want to get smart appliances to help further that connectivity and, in an ideal way, automation. So you don't make the consumer think about it. They've elected into the program, they do it once, and it's done. If you have a smart thermostat but you never actually configure it and you just keep it at that same temperature year round, you're not getting the energy savings. You're not getting the value out of it. So motivating the consumer, educating the consumer as to why they need to do this is really important to avoid those negawatts component of, great, you have the thing, but it's not doing what it's designed to do.
Yeah. I would add that you probably can't have that same conversation in some of these. It's not blanket conversations. It's looking at how our different customers using energy at different aspects. I know when we launched our app where people could do a disaggregation of all their appliances, they were running around shutting things off because just the awareness of what was being used, and all of a sudden their kids could only do washes at night or putting things in the dryer. It couldn't just be one shirt anymore. So you started hearing a lot of those stories, and we jest about those types of things, but it really is that, and it's going to become even more acute. We were talking about EVs coming on board, and at the holidays, everybody goes to see grandma, and all of a sudden, they all are staying there for the weekend, and everybody needs to charge their car, and then grandma's left with this big, huge bill after everybody leaves, let alone a dirty house and all the stuff that she had done to prepare the dinner, right? So how are we going to make sure that we're educating and helping people through that process, and renewables and storage and some of the other aspects that are going to be coming down that pipeline. So seeing where we are on that S-curve and knowing that we've been talking about disruption for quite some time in the industry, and we're seeing it, and it's coming fast. In a couple weeks, I had 6 major customers come and say, yeah, we're looking at these major solar things because head office in Europe told us to go net zero, and this is the only way we can see, this is the only pathway we see. Do you see another one? So it's very engaging customers. So Helen, let me go to you for this question. What steps can electricity companies and the government take in promoting smart energy use? And how can CEA, since this is their conference, and I'm sure they're all taking notes, although Francis is left, but his staff is probably taking notes vigorously on what role they can play and to help ensure Canadians are aware of the role that electricity has in the fight against climate change.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for us in our experience, working with, we have a network of about 50,000 young people, where we've really seen we get the most traction in building these kind of relationships and these trust building processes between the private sector, public sector, and young people is when we kind of move away from kind of thinking of young people or Generation Z as kind of, these vulnerable groups or these beneficiaries, and really start kind of seeing them as partners in this. Young people, or as adversaries as well, because of course we've seen kind of young people take to the streets more and more to really advocate for bolder climate action. And I think when we start to kind of create these pathways for real, honest conversations to happen between young people, between different sectors, and between government, and start addressing some of kind of like the really hard to have conversations, I think that's where we can really start to rebuild that trust in a really meaningful way. And start to really understand like what are those core values that will also make young people want to work in this sector as well, because I think that's a really important piece of this conversation is if you are able to kind of bring more young people into this sector as a space where they see opportunities and they see a sector that reflects their values, you're building this amazing peer-to-peer engagement model where they then are speaking positively about what the sector is doing to their friends, to their families, and you create this amazing ripple effect of advocates for what's happening right now. And so I think that's another really big piece of this. And finally, like education. And I think this is going to be a bit of a multi-pronged approach and not without its big challenges when it comes to how we reform kind of academia to really be kind of preparing young people in a really future-ready way to either be working in the sector or making these decisions that are informed by what's happening in the sector and what options are available to them. But if we're able to really kind of work with academia, work with nonprofit organizations and movements and groups that are tapping into these networks firsthand, and build awareness of this in a really kind of youth-centric way, then that awareness will feed into their decisions going forward, what policies they support, like I said, what technologies they're ready to adopt, the opportunities that they see for themselves. But we really need to kind of start with that core, kind of that beginning point of like what's happening in the education space. That means young people are then growing up and renting or buying homes and don't know what decisions they're supposed to make. Like that's a huge problem. So we need to work on addressing that gap as well. So education, meaningful engagement, workforce development, I would say were the three big pieces.
Wonderful. Mike, how about you?
I absolutely agree with all of those things. I have two children that are 14 and 13, and they've been helping me work on an exhibit. We just literally, the reason I'm here in Canada is because I was actually able to get over to the States last week, and we just launched an exhibit at the Smithsonian, which is a fully immersive virtual reality experience about the future of energy. It's a futures exhibit, and it takes you what it does, and we're trying to persuade Americans to be engaged in energy. And we decided that the method of doing that, and my kids were helping very much with this, was take them back to 1860. Take them to the beginning when power first started getting built and delivered to everybody, and show through virtual reality, basically an 1860s America town, basically evolving, new buildings coming up, new roads coming in, cars coming in, power lines coming up out the ground, power stations, really educating them about how have we got to where we are today, okay, and give them that context of we have only been doing this for 150 years, maybe not even that, and we've done amazing innovations from 150 years ago to today to get to where we are today, to be able to deliver power to just about everybody. But now we've got to change how we go about doing this and show them that this paradigm shift of not just how we generate, but how we consume needs to change. And everyone buys in, they recognize that. But what they aren't aware of is actually how embedded all of that infrastructure is right now, and that it's not just a question of just wanting to change and relying on end consumers to do it. It's the thing that everybody's got to do it. Everybody can make a small action. And if we all just do a little bit all together, it will make a massive impact. So this exhibit is there to kind of find a new way of bringing customers to the point of recognizing that the energy is about them, that the power is in their hands, that they are empowered, they have agency. In fact, more so now when we get into generating at home, consuming, being efficient in the home. Most of the outcomes that we've talked about are going to be achieved by all of us individually being better. Yeah. So that's how we've kind of gone at it, is kind of by showing them that the power is in your hands, that the actions of individuals, when taken at a larger scale, can actually produce major outcomes. So that's how, and I recommend you all go to DC at some point. It's there for 9 months, so you've got plenty of time. But we can also bring it here, and I'd love to maybe we chat with CEA, maybe we can do a kind of Canadian flavor.
Yeah, it would be wonderful.
Which museum?
Smithsonian, in the Arts and Industries.
You were just there, and you're going back, so you can go check it out.
Obviously I'm based out of DC.
It was launched on Thursday. It's brand new.
But yeah, just a point of note, there's the Smithsonian is a museum system. Yeah. So you always have to say which museum.
One? Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, I was in history, and it's like, well, you're wrong.
It's the one with the Bell Nexus flying autonomous drone taxi that is, I kid you not, it is the size of this room.
So somebody Google that and
It's
figure out
amazing.
what
Check it
CEA
out.
is
Bell
for Jason.
Nexus autonomous drone taxi. Amazing.
So let's go over to you, Jason, because obviously this is now on your list of to-do when you go home. But what do you think about this question? Do you need me to repeat it?
Yeah, so let's just, because now I'm back into
So
my
it's like,
Smithsonian.
what action items are we giving to the CEA to take away and helping kind of align this government and helping to promote it from a customer perspective on what the role of electricity is for for climate change?
Yeah, so within that space, again, getting back to that there isn't just one consumer. So there's not just going to be one answer. And an area that we've been talking about right now has largely been tied to residential in focus. But obviously we started with a little bit of commercial and industrial. But there's something where, again, you have so many different segmentations with so many different needs, so you can't just have that singular one-size-fits-all. And what we found within our research was actually, in our latest report, tied to renters. So we did a survey tied to residential renters as well as small business owners, so individuals that do not have ownership of their facilities. And talking through them and talking to this different group, we found that the renters within the residential space actually had a higher perception and desire for some of these changes, but they had the least amount of control because, again, they don't own their facility. So it's great that you can do all of these new things with smart home devices and, oh, I want to switch out all my appliances. Great, I'm not the landowner, so I can't do that. I'm limited in that space, but you have the great opportunity for these behavioral changes. So it is something where you have to work with all the different partners, all the different entities in this space to form that alliance. And we did see actually a willingness to have that conversation with the utility, both from the landlords that we interviewed as well as from the individual renters within both the small business space as well as the residential space. So there's willingness to engage. There's willingness to have that conversation and see what opportunities exist to form together to get some of this accomplished. And especially within the commercial space, again, with the small businesses that we interviewed, energy isn't on their mind. They don't have a dedicated engineer in charge of all facility energy usage. It's a bakery, it's a restaurant, it's a small arts and crafts store or some individual services that you're providing. They don't have that type of opportunity or that resource to immediately implement some of those opportunities. And there was individuals that we interviewed that saw material that would be directly applicable to them, but they thought, oh, must be for the residential side and not for my business side. So again, that education component of understanding that you got to make sure that the messages hit the right people within the right space. And where the facility or the property is not a direct ownership component, working with that landowner, working with that rental group to help facilitate that change is really a critical part, and that's really something that the utility needs to take a more active role in. The landlord is not going to make the effort unless they are directly motivated. It's not in their best interest financially to do that. Is it the right thing to do? Of course, and they would say that as well. But they're in a position where their business is making sure that there are people in the building. And they are not going to do some of these large-scale renovation projects while there is somebody in the space. It's to their disadvantage, so they don't want to take that type of action. And especially given the effects of COVID-19, where there is less movement in some of these places due to the eviction moratorium. And if you're a small business, this is where you set up your restaurant. This is the corners that I've chosen to build my enterprise around. I'm not going to leave just because I get a better savings on my energy bill. Right. So looking at what you can do together in the community within these different groups to help influence that change is really critical, and where a utility has a great opportunity to be more active and engaged. And it's something where both of you actually said this really nicely in terms of the utility space, where when I started, the mission statement from pretty much every utility that I worked with was, we provide safe, reliable, affordable electricity to our service territory. But understanding that there's been a shift in that industry to now it's safe, reliable, affordable services to our service territory is really that critical change in the dynamic. And the more that you can do to customize, personalize, reach out to all of the folks that you serve is a critical path.
Yeah, we were talking about who the customer is, and you know, the customer is no longer only the person who's paying the bill, right? And that's how we've always set it up. That's how all of our customer service systems are set up. But those are not the ones that are necessarily making the decision. So you have it, you know, you have to be talking to the property developers who actually don't have an account with us, right? You have to be talking to the property owners who, in some cases, don't have that. The associations that are talking about business improvement, planning committees in the municipalities on how they're going there. So that customer grouping has really changed, and it's evolved a lot over the last few years, and there's voices that are coming out that really need to be educated, because what they're telling our customers, residential and commercial, in some cases is wrong. They're giving misinformation, or you know, half of the information, and then there's this negative surprise on the other side that you have to try to educate. So it's educating all of that customer ecosystem. But Andrea, you and I are in a very unique situation to be able to provide this task list to CEA, because normally they ask us the questions. So did you create your wish list?
I'm not sure if it's a full wish list, but I want to build on what you just said. I think decarbonization and electrification have become buzzwords. And they're thrown around everywhere, but they're, I think, often not very well defined. So I think the first thing we need to do is define them and fill them with life and show what it actually means, and make the link to our customers and to our different types of customers. What does electrification mean to them? How can they electrify? At what stage? At what cost? With what goals? And really show that link very clearly, and I think that's where the CEA can really play a role. And if we can make it fun by thinking outside of the box a little bit, I think that would be great, because we heard that money talks, and people are usually receptive to monetary offerings. But think about a Fitbit, for example. All of a sudden, steps that you take become a currency, almost, right? It's something that people really enjoy. So can we develop something similar when it comes to the reduction of GHG emissions or certain conservation programs? I think these are the types of things that, as an industry, and we could do together, and where the CEA could play a really good leading role.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of money coming out of the federal government, and I think the CEA can play a very interesting role on being able to help spearhead where that should be going. Kind of very similar to the conservation frameworks that we had that have subsequently left, at least in the Ontario space. I think there's an opportunity to really help incentivize some of those leading edge projects, not the ones that people are going to default automatically do because they all know what those are, but some of those bigger projects that are longer than a 4-year term, right, that are a little bit pushing the envelope on making some significant changes to how things are done, and that we don't end up with the stranded assets that Dr. Mike talked about, and being able to really find a very nice way to blend in all of these different DERs. So with that, I think that's the end of our questions. I have zero understanding of what time it is left, so we may or may not have time for questions from the audience, so let me open it up. Do we? Yeah. Okay. So we have time for questions for any of these folks here.
We have about 20 minutes for questions. Just raise your hands, and Farhan or Julie will come with a mic for you. 15 minutes, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, from the utility perspective, is that something that you can do as well to address some of the bigger elements in terms of the consumer behavior to reduce their carbon footprint? For example, probably from the personal perspective, I think eat less meat would be the most cost-effective way to reduce my carbon emission. But that one is not directly linked to the utility bill that I have, but indirectly, I would say, because that behavior will change the whole of industry and the utility behind it. And like eat less sugar is another one, because sugar is a condensed energy that has a lot of utility behind it. So do you think that even from your perspective, you can help to push that type of message out, or is that something totally?
You want to
just very, very quickly, one of the little Easter eggs in our virtual reality thing in Smithsonian is a breakfast bar which has got different drinks on it. It's got a bottle of beer, it's got a glass of wine, it's got a cup of coffee, it's got a cup of tea. And when you hover over it, it tells you the greenhouse gas emission cost of each of those different beverages. Does anybody know here, like, which one of those four has the highest greenhouse gas emissions? Beer. Beer. Do you know by how much compared to like a cup of tea?
6 times.
More than 6 times, yeah. So it goes, basically, beer is the most expensive from a greenhouse gas, followed by coffee, then wine, then tea. I'm British, I drink lots of tea, so I'm feeling happy. I don't drink.
It also speaks to the value of drinking locally.
My name is also vegetarian. I'm not beef. But that point is, it's a really interesting one, because to make it fun, to make it relevant, and to show people that there's actually really simple things you can do, little things, that if we all do them together, that's when we start making those changes. So I completely agree.
Okay, so another follow-up question on that one thing that more direct related to utility would be the EV adaptation, because we know that one of the biggest hurdle of the EV adaptation was actually on the infrastructure side. So but we see a lot of misconcept there, even like here when we just chat, even in this room, I know there are a lot of misconcept about that in terms of the EV itself and the charging infrastructure, which we actually already have that infrastructure in place in terms of electricity. So I'm wondering what would be your specific action towards helping driving the EV adaptation, because that's really highly directly related to every consumer and the utility sector. Thank you.
So I want to first go back to your question in regards to food, because it is an interesting area that within some of our research we asked as part of our beneficial electrification study, willingness to switch to electric tools and electric transportation and within the cooking space. It was very fascinating for us to see where across the board people recognize, oh, this is a cost saver for me if I go to electricity within the tools and appliances space, except for cooking. People had very particular attitudes around how they cooked their food. If you were a gas person, you were going to die on that hill. So it's fascinating to see, and this is definitely an opportunity as you go through your electrification standpoint of what are the products and programs that we're trying to push, what are the opportunities within that space. Education around the value of electric cooking is an opportunity. Sorry for the gas cookers out there. But that,
cookers.
Yeah, both. Yeah, all of the above. Yeah, it's fascinating where that was an aspect of consumer preference that overrode everything in terms of all the other aspects of environmental benefit or cost benefit and whatnot. And it was like, no, I prefer cooking on gas, with gas. So it is very interesting, and again, there's an opportunity for education within that space. When it comes to EVs, this again is an area where we often talk about at-home charging as the solution, but that doesn't cover all of the use cases. Again, I live in an urban area, I live in a townhome, I do not have a garage, I do not have a consistent parking space. Maybe I'm parking on the street that is relatively close that I could potentially run an extension cord, but realistically that's not a possibility. So even though I totally fit the demographic of someone who would be willing to buy an EV, I am out of the market. So working with the developers, working with everybody within that infrastructure space to allow for additional charging opportunities is a great area where utilities can take a more active role. That's going to reduce the range anxiety. That's going to reduce the hurdles that individuals have towards making that purchase.
And I know Claire is here. I don't know if she's still here, but from Plug and Drive, and she and I have had lots of conversations about EV adoption and where that is. And you're right, not everybody is set up for that. Not everybody has access to a plug. And I remember coming on in the utility sector and seeing this article about this poor woman who spent so much money buying an EV and then brought it back and plugged it into the little, the block heater, Bullard. And then all of a sudden her neighbors were paying her to fill her EV, which was nice for probably a day. And then the condo corporation realized that, well, no, that's a common element. You can't have all your neighbors paying for your electricity to charge or fill up your car. And then all of a sudden she's like, well, I can't move. I've got this vehicle, now we're stuck. So we've had a pretty big awareness campaign over the last little while, going and talking to condo developers and talking to apartment buildings, because it's not just easy to rip up everything. Like, there's a cost to that, but, and figuring out what that looks like. But also there's education to back into the utilities sector and our regulator about, what is the cost that person should bear, because at some stage, as everybody starts adopting EVs, somebody's going to trigger a massive upgrade required on that transformer, at the substation, and they're not paying $25,000 where somebody else only paid $2,000, right, to be able to do that upgrade. So there's an element of taking and a look at all of those elements, and it's not just using the same application. And I know, Andrea, you think the same way, so, and you provide it to a different sector, so I'd love to get your opinion on her question as well, and then we'll go to another question.
Yeah, no, I think the electrification of transportation is huge, obviously, and it's coming faster than ever before. And it applies to residential and non-residential. And I think we really have to think through what we need to do for our customers who all of a sudden want to electrify their fleet, for example. And as a utility, we might be the last ones they think about, because they've thought about, all their business cases, and then they've purchased their vehicles potentially, and then they realize, oops, I need power for that, and they assume the power is there, right? Because they're used to getting safe and reliable electricity, and at some point there might not be capacity, not to the extent that they need it, or it would require a huge upgrade. So I think these are processes that we need to think through with the regulator, where we have to have a much more actively engaged conversation with our customers as early as possible, and try and get information from them, ideally before they make these plans, just to make sure we're not a hurdle or a barrier to electrification, but an enabler.
Do we have time for one more question? Yeah.
Hello. In Ontario, there are many households and businesses that, like distributed energy generation, would like to be putting in a solar system, speak to their LDC, and after a brief bit of investigation, they're told, oh, no, sorry, there's a grid constraint there, you can't connect. And they cite the infamous 7% rule. But in Germany, I don't know if they're that much smarter than we are, but they seem to be able to accept over 5 times as much. Are the LDCs disincentivized to do this, or do we really just have a dumber electrical system here?
Take that one. That's a loaded question, but I think we certainly, the 7% rule allows us a certain amount of comfort, right? Knowing that we're not overloading the system, because that it's a threshold. If we stick to the threshold, we'll be fine. In order to go beyond that threshold, I think we need to have much more visibility into the system, especially into real-life operations of the system. So that's one hurdle, and one feature that we need to work on and enable. And potentially we just need to look at certain codes as well, and again, work with the regulator to figure out where we can push the envelope a little bit in certain areas. Because I agree, we will be getting more and more requests for net metering, for solar, for DERs, and we need to enable them, and we can't just sit back and cite the rule book. If the rule book doesn't serve our customers, then we need to, I think, advocate with the regulator to see how we can change it in a safe way that doesn't risk the reliability of the system, but that still enables all of these very valuable resources.
Well, that is where digitalization is fundamentally the key to that problem. It's about granularity of visibility of demand and future supply. So being able to start managing your grid down at, beyond the substation, even behind the meter, so that customers can be part of that solution rather than being seen as part of the problem, which is how it's kind of manifested at the minute. Everyone thinks too many solar panels. I had the same problem. I had the exact same problem in my house. I could put 4 kilowatts on my roof, and that was it. And I happened to work for a utility company. I worked for EDF for 30 years, and I was saying, the guy I know, I'm the only person on my entire street that's going to have a solar panel. Give me 6. He gave me 6 kilowatts, but it was a negotiation because they'd have no visibility. They don't know who's got EVs, by the way. That's another thing, is being able to identify who's got an electric vehicle and when are they charging it. disaggregation very helpful. But it's actually about being able to automate your distribution operation down beyond the substation level so that the grid manages itself, that it controls those inverters, that it puts controls on inverters, it puts controls on EV charging, it puts even smart thermostats that allow for the grid to worry about itself in its own little ecosystem, rather than trying to have one-size-fits-all legislation that doesn't apply to rural Canada, only applies to urban areas. So, more data, and I can see about that later.
And I think there's more collaboration that's required, and we talked about different types of customers and being able to hear from those customers and amplify that voice, and it really is changing the dynamic of the conversation. Some of the rules have been around for a lot of years, and we, as an industry, do default to safety first, right? And that safety component, it's really hard to tell an engineer and people that are connecting the power that you can go a little gray here, right? Because really they're very black and white, and being able to have a conversation that evolves what we're doing and changing some rules. So we've been, I would say, a little slow on some of those conversations and evolving, but the speed of the change that we're seeing, and I think you've heard it here on this panel for sure, the speed of change that we're having, the fact, again, we're talking about this panel's on prosumers, right? So you're talking about a very different type of customer that is trying to produce, is trying to consume, in some cases has a lot more knowledge than they've ever had before, not just on what our rule book is, but on how they're using it, what that application is. That customer consultation is becoming a lot more important, and some of those voices are being amplified. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that stakeholdering that's happening within the renewable sector, especially here in Ottawa. It started pre-COVID, and we've made some adjustments already in certain areas, and you'll continue to see that type of engagement with customers moving forward.
3 minutes.
Okay. Is there another question? Yep. You're on the next panel, so you got to be careful.
I know, and I think it's a kind question, but it's kind of a riddle me this. Indy, Butany-DeSouza, Elexicon Energy. First, I want to tell you that I'm going to leave this panel enjoying the fact that I am contributing to the environment positively with my active wine consumption. So thank you. But the more serious question is, I fully appreciate the generational divide and the expectation of the generations behind us, including my children and their children, who expect far more investment by our organizations from an environmental standpoint. My question to you, and wearing my former regulatory hat, is, but who pays? So how do we maybe for the panel, how do we collectively move that dialogue into regulatory forums where the regulator understands that we are supporting the shift to net zero for the communities that we serve, and in aid of what our customers are asking and expecting of us, more importantly, what this earth needs. But it comes with a cost, and we're not funded that way. And so how do we begin that policy dialogue with regulators across the country?
So let me take and Jeff is staring right at me, so who oversees our regulatory, so turn around. I think in some cases we need to shake the sheet a little bit, right? And we have been told that the customer who triggers, the customer that's wanting it must be the customer that pays, which is totally contrary to making sure that we have a socialized service offering to our customers. And in some aspects, that piece has to go, and it's up to us as utilities to push that conversation, and I think it's up to, so Francis, from a CEA action point, I think it's you guys helping us do that as well on that policy piece. But I think we have to test the limit a lot more in these areas, and I know Hydro One has something in front of the regulator, and you guys are going through some stuff, and it's talking through those scenarios and bringing some of that customer feedback, the stakeholdering that we received, that everybody is expecting us to do this, and we need to go that way and understand that if we don't, that divide between the haves and the have-nots that already exists today, which is already a problem and it has been identified as a crisis here in Ottawa, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed in a holistic manner. So it can't just be picking and choosing and applying all that pressure on one rate group. So
What does Helen
and yeah, Helen would be.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that I think coming back to my earlier point kind of about creating more kind of space for these conversations to be had in a really kind of open and honest way. I think young people very much want to know kind of where the pain points exist. Like if cost is a factor and kind of who's going to bear the cost burden of a certain solution that young people are really putting their weight behind, then they want to be part of those conversations and really learning more about the complexities of why that's an issue, why that's a barrier that's holding back progress. And they want to be kind of part of the participatory, complex solution design of like, how can we map out that cost to more effectively kind of flow through where it needs to go. And young people are kind of supportive of very specific policies that could be leveraged, maybe not specifically for this, but kind of could be leveraged for other areas of energy and climate action. So for example, from our Global Youth Energy Outlook, overwhelming support for a carbon tax from young people. So I don't think that kind of willingness to engage on the part of young people, willingness to really understand the policy options that are out there, the fact that the money needs to come from somewhere, I don't think that's going to die off. I think young people just want to feel like the door is open and there is interest and appetite from actors who are working in these sectors to meaningfully engage young people in that process of figuring out solutions and ways forward. It could look like forming a task team that's specifically working on that challenge, like Student Energy often creates we partner with different organizations, we'll create specific youth task teams or advisory councils focused on a really specific challenge that exists in that sector. And it's an opportunity for young people from kind of multiple disciplinary backgrounds, kind of early work experiences as well, to come together and like brainstorm solutions together. And it's a great way to kind of open that door and start that conversation. And then you get young people kind of sharing that insight further on with their peers, and you start to kind of build a bit more of a generational and collective awareness of like, not just kind of getting entrenched in the system and like, oh, so many problems, but starting to kind of build more critical thinking kind of amongst the entire generation of like, okay, real barriers do exist. How are we going to kind of overcome this and push in the right direction? So bit of a vague answer, but I would say that's just kind of coming back to that dialogue and trust building exercise.
Maybe just one really quick point. I think I want to go back to the demand response, for example. We heard earlier there is a lot of capacity on the grid that we can tap into. So maybe we have to think beyond poles and wires as an exclusive way to build out electrification. I think we need to think in the broader spectrum and think about other solutions that might be much more affordable.
Is that good, Indy?
Yeah. All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left today. Thank you for the amazing discussion. Thanks, panel. So it's now time for a short break. Please join us again at 3:15 when we will kick off another panel. C'est maintenant le temps d'une courte pause. Veuillez venir à 15h15 pour le lancement du deuxième panel. Merci.
Bonjour à tous, je suis Susannah Willerton, coordinatrice des programmes juridiques et financiers à l'ACA. And as the coordinator for the finance program, I've had the chance to enjoy the last couple of days with members of our CFO committee, who are also taking this opportunity to meet in person for the first time in 2 years. And after months of speaking through a screen, it's really been a pleasure to get to finally meet some members in person. And just, based on some chats I've been having and the energy in the room, I can really tell that everyone is feeling the same. So before we get started with the next panel, I can see you're already here, but I'd like to take a moment first to thank some of our sponsors. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to offer such a high-quality event. So avant de commencer le prochain panel, j'aimerais remercier les commanditaires des activités d'aujourd'hui. Sans leur soutien, on n'aurait pas pu vous offrir un événement de si grande qualité. Alors, our gold sponsors include Hatch, KPMG, Siemens Canada, Ballard, and Domino High Voltage. Our silver sponsors include Tantalus, Eaton, Ericsson Canada, Redline Communications, and Bidgley. And of course, for our upcoming annual CEO panel, will be sponsored by MNP. Thank you to MNP for all of your support in preparing today's event and for moderating the panel. And as a reminder, we will be taking questions from the audience this afternoon, so please alert the CEA staff if you'd like to ask a question during the panel. Oh, and actually, also before we get started, it's not on the program, but I've been asked to remind you all, or to let you all know that before dinner at 5:30, the bar will actually be open. So you don't have an hour to kill between our last afternoon event and dinner. You actually only have 30 minutes. And after that, just join us across the hall at the bar. So now we can go ahead and get started with that out of the way. I'd like to begin by welcoming Adriana Gliga-Belavic, partner in privacy and data governance at MNP. She's joined by Mike Marsh, we all know, president and CEO of SAS Power and outgoing chair of CEA's board of directors. Indy Butany-DeSouza, president and CEO of Lexicon Energy, and Melanie Bailey, president of ATCO.
Thank you, everyone, for joining our panel today. As our presenter mentioned, I'm a partner at MNP. Sorry, at MNP, proud sponsor of the event here. We do have a national practice for energy and utilities, and our leader is present here as well. And as a privacy and cybersecurity partner, I work with a lot of energy and utilities organizations to help them understand what the risks are and threats to their operations, and also help them build the resilience within their operations. I will pass it on now to my esteemed panelists to do some introductory remarks.
Thanks so much, Adriana. And I'm glad that you got the name mix-up out of the way, because that might happen to me as well. I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here, and thanks so much to the Canadian Electricity Association. It's wonderful to see so many great friends here in person. It's so 2019. We've all become accustomed to change over the past year and a half, and the toll that that change can take on our families and on our businesses. But as we all know, change can be a great thing. And I'm very excited now to have a front row seat to witness change at my new organization, not Electra, Elexicon Energy. What makes these changes special? Well, Elexicon Energy is a new and growing company, only 2 years old, and we've been building on the consolidation of the former Viridian connections as well as Whitby Hydro. A large part of the rationale for that merger was not just to make a cost-efficient utility, but to strive to be better, embracing synergies that not only improve our financial performance, but also that continue to elevate our customers' experience. We're part of the fastest growing region in Ontario, something that's been particularly enhanced by this pandemic, as both people and businesses have been migrating east of Toronto to tap into our vibrant communities of Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Clarington, and Belleville. We're striving to be not just a better serve not just our urban customer base better, but also stretching into the rural regions and all the way into cottage country in Ontario. And then what's the other change? Well, that's me, new as president and CEO, 9 weeks strong. And I've commented before that this is like having a baby. Nobody cringe, no gory details here, but you count in the beginning by weeks and months, and eventually it's all a wash. But I'm not new to the sector. I've been in the energy sector in Ontario for over 20 years. And we've had, let's face it, at times a tumultuous history. But we're also in the midst of a fascinating transformational change that includes regulatory modernization and a renewed focus on customer care. And this is all on the cusp of supply needs and scarcity that will not only put pressure on all segments of the electricity system, but they also put pressure on governments and regulators across the country. I strongly believe that utilities need to acknowledge, understand, and embrace, and I think we've heard some of these Ds, but I'm going to reference the 4 Ds: democratization, decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization. And it's the democratization of energy that perhaps we haven't touched on as much. We need to make the right investments to properly serve our communities. And we need to embrace progressive actions to address climate change, just as the previous panel referenced. We need to do so, never forgetting our fundamental responsibility to deliver safe, affordable, and reliable services to our customers. And we must maintain a culture that places primary importance on operational excellence, achieving efficiencies where we can, and a laser sight on serving our customers, all the while being ever so mindful not to compromise safety. Transparency is paramount, and I want to have ongoing engagement not only with our shareholders, but customers and communities that we serve. There's never been a more exciting time to be considering the issues that this panel is going to look at, what a utility looks like come 2030. But let's be clear, this is a foggy future, and even this panel, maybe I'm speaking for myself, but I certainly don't have all the answers. A lot is going to change between now and 2030, most of which is going to be out of our control. So how do we plan for that uncertainty for this utility of 2030? We can't. But what we do know, and what I would suggest to you, is that in isolation, we're likely to get it wrong. What's the cliche? None of us are as smart as the sum of us. Collaboration is key as we get to 2030. Thank you.
Melanie, go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Melanie Bailey. I'm the president of ATCO Electric in Alberta. And I thought maybe I would just talk a little bit about ATCO to give some context as to some of my remarks and why I might be answering questions the way I am. So ATCO Electric is our electricity division within ATCO. ATCO is a group of companies that are involved in natural gas, utilities, both in Alberta and Australia, some power generation, renewables, structures and logistics businesses. So we have a variety of both regulated and unregulated businesses in ATCO. ATCO Electric is a T&D wires company in Alberta, and we also have vertically integrated electric utilities doing generation and retail services in the Northwest Territories and in the Yukon. So we do have a presence in Canada's north, which I'd be happy to maybe speak to later about what that means for some of the decarbonization goals that we have in this country when we live in the place that we do, and some of the citizens of our country live as north as they do. But we also have a natural gas utility in Alberta, ATCO Gas, and so when we talk about all of these issues that are impacting our sector, very mindful of what that means for a natural gas company in Canada these days. And also just being where we are, most of our service territories in northern Alberta, the biggest customer segment for ATCO Electric is the oil and gas industry. And so that, I think, just presents different challenges and maybe leads into what, one of the points that I wanted to make here today is that there are ambitious goals for net zero by 2050. We do have to get through 2030 first. But when you look across the country, we have very different regulatory structures. We have different generation mix. Just for example, Alberta is mostly fossil fuel generation still today, moved off coal and onto natural gas, but still fossil fuel, whereas other provinces are very rich in hydro or nuclear or other non-emitting sources. So the solution in all of the places across the country is different. It varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and we can't be applying kind of peanut butter approach everywhere, and we really do need to consider what the right solution is in each place, because I do believe it's different. The other thing I'd say that we need to continue to make sure is top of mind and is in every conversation we have about net zero is affordability. And there is, by a large stretch, a gap between what we need to do to get to net zero in Canada and what an average citizen or person can pay. And that gap exists. Now, that's not to say that it can't be done. It can be done, and I think it takes some visionary leadership from business leaders in this room, that is a problem that we can solve and that we must solve. We don't have a choice but to solve it. But it's going to take a nationwide approach, and it's going to take commitments from governments, not just on we're going to get to net zero, but on how we're going to pay to get to net zero, and how we're going to ensure that there's equity among customers and among citizens of Canada. Because we cannot get to a solution where the people who can afford to pay for things like EVs and solar panels get a deal, whereas the people who can't afford it get left holding the bag. That's not an acceptable solution, and it's a tough nut to crack, but I think that as business leaders in this room, it's one that we must do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you. I'll start by saying, first of all, I feel like I'm the guy that's not like the others here.
Why?
And it's not because it's male female, but I'm from that boomer generation, and I just saw that slide earlier on here, and I'll try to keep up with the energy in front of me here today. I'll set some context for SAS Power. We often compare ourselves with ATCO Power and ATCO Electric because they were very similar electric utilities. Also New Brunswick Power on the East Coast. But we're a vertically integrated company. We're Crown Corporation, 5,000 megawatts of generation inside the provincial borders. We have about 500,000 customers. We have a distribution and transmission service territory of, the entire province, which is 650,000 square kilometers. There's two local distribution companies in the province. One is the City of Saskatoon, and the other is the City of Swift Current. And we supply bulk power to them, and they service the residents inside those areas. So we have it fairly simple that way. But as we look at the future and where we're heading, we have a big job ahead of us. We are over 70% fossil energy. And the issues of decarbonization are really quite large for us and for the utilities in Alberta as well. But we look at a number of things that are affecting our world, and it's the same with every utility across the country. Regulation is very important. Regulation, and now we heard earlier, and we've been working with this, I know all the other utilities have, ESG requirements on the part of large industrial consumers. Over 60% of our energy requirements in the province are baseload. We have large mining operations in the province. We have large oil and gas operations in the province. And their boards are asking them to move quicker on cleaning up their supply chain. And of course, we're the biggest part of their supply chain. We have to move. Because they do have capacity and access to capital, they can move and do what they want without the utility if they choose to do so. I agree with the points that Melanie had made. We have to be moving. As utilities, we have to be aware of the technology that's available. And we had a great discussion earlier today with Dr. Michael Weber. And we talked about technology, but he said a few things that I think apply to us and probably to all other utilities out there. And that's, if you move too fast, you may not be able to explore an opportunity that might otherwise be the solution, and it may end up costing you more money than it should have. So, and this links into the affordability question. How fast, how soon, where do we go, and how are we going to do this in a way that protects the affordability picture for all our customers out there? We're on a path. We started the decarbonization over 10 years ago when we built the first carbon capture plant integrated carbon capture plant in the world. That plant continues to operate today. The unfortunate part is regulation in Canada and retirement of the coal fleet in the United States has allowed people to move directly to gas, and nobody is looking at carbon capture on coal facilities anymore. They're now starting to look at it on oil and gas and high-intensity industries like cement and steel production. And I think it is a part of the equation in the future that is going to be needed to help reduce carbon emissions. But we have to do this at a pace and with economic choices that are prudent, because when we look at the past, I would, and again, I go back to another slide from this morning. Why do consumers and people trust their utility? It's because we've worked hard, I believe, to make it affordable, to make it reliable. People want to know that they can go to their utility and get good information and to help them make choices. So utilities are not on the leading edge or bleeding edge of a lot of new technology. We want to make the right choice. You do it with proven technology. You install it, long life assets that are going to be there for 50, 60, 100 years. And we want to do it properly so that we don't upset the balance, increase rates in our own jurisdictions that would make the entire economy unhealthy. And I think this is where we all have this same gnawing pain, if you will, as we look to the future here. There are so many challenges on the decarbonization front, on the electrification front. But how do we do this in the right way at the right time and keep it affordable for all of us?
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. So maybe we'll start our discussion of where we are today with our business models, because many of these business models are actually structured by current provincial regulatory systems, including cost of service, performance-based regulations, but also maybe combinations of the two. So if you maybe would like to comment how this structure or do they still hold for moving towards decarbonization and innovation? Or if not, what are some of the barriers or obstacles that you see?
You want me to start?
Indy?
Okay. I don't see a hybrid approach, frankly, when I consider the regulatory framework, and you're totally taking me back to my roots. I think that PBR is probably the better mechanism compared to cost of service regulation. I think it encourages innovation and decarbonization probably more solidly, most particularly because it's the best approach or the approach for aligning competitive pressures to that regulation is looking to mimic, moving prices towards cost, resources to their greatest value, and encouraging companies to innovate and to better understand customer preferences. Here in Ontario, the OEB has 3 rate-setting mechanisms: custom incentive regulation, price cap, IR. My God, I step out of regulatory for 2 months and I forget the words. So custom IR, price cap IR, and annual IR index. These all provide incentives in order to improve performance of our companies and ensure that the plans that we're undertaking are meeting our customers' needs. And in Ontario, I think somebody can check me if I'm wrong on this, but I think the Ontario Energy Board is the only regulator that now has, as part of its tenets, the fact that it needs to encourage innovation. The question is, how do you get there? And so we are encouraged to have our customers weigh in on an ongoing basis to help shape decarbonization goals. For me, customer engagement is an ongoing process, and so I hearken back to the panel that we just heard from, and we are hearing from our customers that they are committed to a low-carbon economy, to encouraging us or seeing their utilities that are trusted. Like you said, Mike, we've invested significant time and effort in being that trusted ally to our customers, so we're encouraged to help our communities achieve net zero. But it's something that we need to work with our regulators to achieve. And so it ties back to the question that I had asked that previous panel, because frankly, we're not funded to do so, and the cost to do so is extreme, at least in my view. And on the previous panel, there was a discussion of how you get there, customer-based working groups, those sorts of things. But it seems to me that customers are decidedly unaware of what the overall cost to the system is going to be. and exactly how different the supply mix is across the country. And so it isn't a peanut butter approach, as Melanie had said, but it needs to be a full Canadian commitment because that's what we've committed to at the COP, and that's what other countries have committed to at the COP as well. So I think we need to understand what our shareholders and customers value, because for both sides of that equation, there will be somebody bearing the cost, even though we're trying to boil it down to the affordability factor. So I would say that PBR is probably the best proxy, but I would challenge that regulators, even if they have innovation as part of their new toolkit, they haven't dug into how we're going to get there. And frankly, then on top of it, Mike, as you referenced technology, I'm really challenged, and I would challenge us to challenge our regulators on how we get projects how we get the science projects, how we get out of science projects, because we do a lot of science projects, aka pilots, and how we take that interesting technology and are able to deploy it in order to achieve better decarbonization goals.
Anybody wants to focus on their own province?
So I agree with everything Indy just said about performance-based regulation versus cost of service and all the different ways you can do that. I think I might take this to a bit of maybe a policy perspective, in that our regulators are only able to work within the bounds set for them by the enabling legislation. And so if the legislation doesn't say that, energy efficiency or demand-side management or demand response is a tool available to utilities, then we become challenged in our ability to do those things. And we heard Dr. Weber earlier today talk about the number one thing we should be doing is energy efficiency and conservation, and that's the way that we can sort of set ourselves up for the best decarbonization success. So I think, while regulators have all these tools in their toolkits, it's really, I almost think you need to take it a step further than that, and make sure that the legislation that gives the regulators their powers and that gives the utilities the authority to do what we need to do can contemplate these things. So if it costs me more to do something to work towards decarbonization, do I still have certainty that I'm going to be able to recover that? Stranded assets. If I'm, going to invest in something new which yields the old, no longer used or useful before the end of its life, is the utility at risk for that? So those are really important questions that can the answers to them make it either a barrier or an enabler to what we need to do.
So maybe let me continue that. So if you had the opportunity to help design the new regulations, then what would be some of the proposals you will make for your province or to facilitate the move to where the new business models need to be? Mike, would you like to?
Sure.
Nobody's chomping at the bit for that one.
Well, I think to start, I should explain that in Saskatchewan, we don't have a formal regulatory process like Alberta or Ontario does. We have a rate review panel that is appointed by the government, and we have to submit the same information that any other utility would across Canada. We have open hearings to the public. People can intervene and speak for or against the application that we're going for. But we don't have an army of lawyers. We do not have full departments that are dealing with the legal minutia about what's in or what's out. We have to pass the prudency test like everybody else. We have to make sure that we are transparent in our capital programs and that we can explain why the investments that we are making are important. And we've been able to do this. But as we look at the decarbonization issue, you heard it today. Moving to renewable energy is the near-term solution, and renewables with battery storage is an obvious one. But battery storage is not yet of age, and it's certainly not in the economical window right now without lots of federal government support. It comes down to affordability. you know, do you begin to put those systems in now, or do you wait 2 years or 3 years until that technology comes of age and the price drops in half? How do you go forward and tell the public you're going to be cleaning up the grid, but oh, by the way, here's another 8% rate increase? This is the balance that we all have to achieve in our own jurisdictions, regardless of, you know, what regulatory framework is in place. So we will continue to work on that. I would suggest, like in our area, I'm already benefiting because I don't have to hire a whole bunch of lawyers to, you know, to deal with what you two have to in your jurisdictions. But we have to be mindful of the balance and the speed of change so that it is affordable and it can maintain that affordability over a period of time.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure what to do with the fact that you think we have armies of lawyers.
It's not a bad thing.
We do have some. We do have some. I don't know about an army. But yeah, I think some of the things I just talked about, stranded assets is an issue, particularly in Alberta, where we have a kind of a unique risk there that the other jurisdictions in Canada don't have. So I think we would, like, you know, could start from scratch. That's one that we would address. But even there was a bill put forward in Alberta just a couple of weeks ago, Bill 86, and I'm loath to comment too much about it because we're not done assessing it yet. But for the first time, it addresses energy storage as a utility asset in that bill. And up to 2 weeks ago, that was not a thing in Alberta, and it's 2021, and it's kind of probably shocking to all of you, right? So, you know, can a regulated utility own storage, or is that set aside as a market participant in the energy-only market in Alberta on the generation side? So things like that, you know, policies do change over time that are enabling. Are they fast enough? No, and I don't think they ever will be fast enough. And do they go far enough? One of the things that I think utilities need to grapple with is the very long-standing and traditional demarcation point of the meter, where we are upstream of the meter, and downstream of the meter we are not, and that's not a utility's place downstream of the meter. But when you start talking about demand response, for example, and that the most economical way to use the grid is for the utility to be able to turn things on and off downstream of the meter. Well, how do you deal with that, and what's the legislative framework behind that, and how does a regulator approve or not approve that? So those are the kinds of things I think probably need to change faster than they might be changing. And I think in any industry, every industry complains about the regulations and their regulator not moving fast enough. So this isn't unique to us.
I really think that my regulator here in Ontario needs to phone a friend in Alberta, because we've been talking about distributed energy regulation this is year 3. Yeah. And so 2 weeks ago sounds pretty good to me from where I sit here in Ontario.
We haven't fully assessed it yet,
so it might be good.
It might be good.
It might be good, okay. Well, tentatively we'll say it's better than the 0 here, but my colleagues have hit on many of the key points. Energy equity and affordability are the ones that I would keep coming back to when we think about the context of redoing the regulatory framework in Ontario or across the country. I think the other piece is, of course, that when we consider new technology, distributed energy resources, can you invest in battery storage, solar panels? There is this element of, and who serves that last customer, meaning the low-income customer. So how do we make that equitable and accessible for all of them? And so if big companies have microgrids, or if you know, those prosumers, as we spoke about earlier, have disposable income that they can invest, well, how can that be leveraged for the benefit of all? Because ultimately, I mean, we do have I would say, a very socialized electricity system, no matter where you sit in the country. And so I think those pieces need to be fundamental to whatever discussion we're having on how we revise our system. And then, of course, there's the piece that perhaps we haven't touched on, and to my mind, it's now fundamental given that we are in 2021, and that's how do you engage Indigenous communities and ensure that they are engaged throughout this dialogue. So those are, additional elements I would offer.
Yeah, and you touched on something very important that, Canadian pays anywhere from 7 to 16 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity in Canada. And Melanie, maybe you want to comment a little bit about what's going on with the northern communities and their ability to afford electricity.
Yeah, and it's like we set this up, but we didn't. It's a perfect
No,
segue
it is
to
a
what
good
Indy
segue.
just said about Indigenous engagement and participation, and the whole equity problem that we have, and that there are a lot of places in Canada, not just in the Northern Territories, but in Northern Alberta, Northern BC, Northern Quebec, where very small, remote communities are isolated from the electricity grid. They largely have diesel plants for their electricity generation. And it's some of the highest emission electricity generation in the country is for these very small, remote, largely Indigenous communities. Not just the diesel that they're burning, generating electricity on site, but also the cost and the emissions associated with getting the diesel there, which is often trucked on thousands of kilometers of ice roads or flown in. So that is a big problem, and it's one that needs to be solved, and we can't have a system where all the money is funneled to places where there's less of a problem at the expense of places like that. And yes, it's a small population of people, but in Canada we have a system here where we all enjoy the same quality of life across the country. And we need to be able to continue to do that in an affordable way. And so some of our effort, our resources, our time, and our energy does need to be spent on those remote, isolated northern communities, and how to, if we're gonna have a net zero electricity grid by 2035, which has been committed to, that is a very, very important piece of that. And it's to Indy's point, you can't have. Yeah. You can't have the people who can, where it's more affordable to put in renewables or storage or some of these systems, be the ones getting the deal at the expense of places where it's not affordable to do those things.
Okay, thank you. And I think Dr. Weber mentioned this morning that increased electrification will need to happen in transportation, even industrial processes, as we transition towards the low carbon economy. So maybe if you can comment on how are you thinking about those, getting the equation right between reliability, affordability, and efficiency as you think of the new business models. Mike?
Sure. I'll maybe start first on this one. Every utility across Canada is working on a grid modernization program in some way, shape, or form. Every one of us have recognized that not only are smart meters just fundamental to a grid today, but when you start to look at injecting energy into a grid from hundreds, if not thousands of points, you need it to be safe. You need to have visibility into that grid. So all of us are at various stages of putting in distribution SCADA systems, advanced EMS systems, really putting the technology into the grid so that we don't rely on a customer to phone us, and we can tell very, very closely where there's an issue. As we look at electrifying other sectors, this just makes the whole issue 3, 4, or 5 times bigger than what it is today. And we are looking very carefully at how we can increase battery capacity in people's homes or in micro communities around the province, having charging stations that maybe a group of 10 houses could use, or shopping centers, I think, is traditionally where people have been looking at. But I think a lot of people just want to be able to charge when they come home or close to home. The other panel member said he lives in a downtown core and doesn't even have a parking space that he can rely on every day. So how do you serve those customers with a distribution grid that was never designed for something like this today. It's going to take a lot of infrastructure that's going to need to be built out. And we are going to have to do this mindfully over a period of time. I don't know today how many electric vehicles are in Ontario, but I think we just hit 700 in Saskatchewan, just to put it in perspective.
There might be 700 in my neighborhood.
Yeah, okay. Well,
And they're all Teslas, frankly.
I think everybody's waiting for the F-150 that
Yeah.
we were talking about.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I am. I drive an old F-150, and it cost me $162 to fill up last time. Anyway, I digress. The point about electrification of the other sectors is that it's going to require a very strong grid and a very safe grid, but a grid that we all have visibility into. And that's going to require technologies that in some cases aren't even available today, but we're working on it. And this is where the innovation comes in. And it's incumbent upon us to provide that visibility, because then we can ensure the safety and the resiliency and reliability of that grid over the longer term, because that's what people look to us for. And that's where I think in the future, a traditional utility like ours, vertically integrated with generation, transmission, and distribution, may not look the same anymore. And indeed, we probably have 25% of our generation supplied by independent power producers today. And I suspect as we retire our coal fleet and look at the future, that's going to increase considerably, to the point where I can see even a vertically integrated company become a wires company at some point down the road, because the generation side of the business is maturing very, very fast. So we're left with building out this grid, managing the grid, providing visibility, providing optionality and choice for customers that they haven't had in the past, and we'll do it. But it's going to take a lot of creative people working in our customer programs department in every utility, and a lot of bright technical people to make this come together. And I'll always say, and to make it affordable.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
every sentence, with and to keep it affordable.
But that's the challenge, right? Like all of those things are true, and then on top of that, we don't have a distribution grid that can handle two-way flow. So we don't have robust enough systems. Two, I think across the country, we're in a stage of needing asset renewal, and that investment is costly. And then we don't have the ability for two-way flow. And so when we think about how we deal with this as we move forward, we also have to consider the intended as well as unintended consequences. Like, are there areas then, you said transparency, Mike, absolutely, but then what happens if you get to an area that has too much DER penetration? Then what do you do? Is there an operating envelope for DERs? And so the list goes on in terms of the consequences. I feel like we are so far behind the 8 ball that we do need the creative forces of everybody in this room and perhaps an army of others as well. But it's not clear entirely how we get there, again, without stranding assets, making it affordable. It's a lot of competing interests at the same time. And, at least here in Ontario, our premier just announced, more electrification. He's not going to give us credits for it, but more electrification. But how do we play catch up?
I think, though, part of what we're doing in modernizing our grid, and Mike's right, we're all in various stages of modernizing our grid and having, smart metering in there. An important part, something you have to do on top of that is, and I've already said it, energy efficiency. So, we know EVs are coming, and we know that's going to significantly increase the reliance on the electric system and the amount of capacity it has to have. So let's reduce everybody's usage on everything else to try to give ourselves a little bit of headroom. We also know, and this was said on the last panel, that the electric system peaks at a certain time. It's designed for that peak, and we have this great amount of untapped capacity in the system at all other times. And so how do we use that capacity first? And that's where, first you need a modernized grid with smart meters and advanced distribution management systems and SCADA, and you need all of those things, but you also need to provide a price signal to the customer. Dr. Weber said it, people will will sell their privacy for $1. Like, people will respond to price signals. We all do it. And especially the sort of next generation that's coming up. We saw in the statistics that were up on the screen that the younger the people are, the more willing they are to subscribe to those things, to respond to price signals with dynamic pricing and demand response. So not only are we going to try to get the customers to, charge their vehicles when there's capacity on the grid to charge their vehicles, but also the utility's ability to operate things downstream of the meter on behalf of customers. And to do that, not necessarily a person at a computer pushing a button to do that, but that we've got, things like AI and machine learning and all of that, so that those things are happening by themselves and seamless to the customer. And is that going to be enough? Is there enough excess capacity on the grid we can tap into in off-peak times to, so that everybody can have an EV? No, it's not going to be enough. There's more needed, but that should certainly be where we start.
Okay, and you all brought up interesting ideas there: modernization, digitization, use of sensors. So if we look at what's going on on the cyber perspective, we have seen a large increase of cyber attacks, and specifically ransomware. And we have seen organizations being attacked, and not just impacting the organization ability to function, but also communities and maybe the safety of people. So from that perspective now, how do you, if you can comment, how do you think about building cyber resiliency into these new models, or what organizations can do to build trust with customers if we are asking them to provide us with more information for getting the services?
Maybe I'll start. My previous role included Chief Privacy Officer. I think the reality is that for many years, utilities were not heavily invested in IT. I think that's a fair statement, and it's another area where we've played catch up. But it's almost undeniable that we've had to make these investments, and will continue to make the IT-related investments, because everything now relies on the Internet of Things. But with those investments comes exposure, because everything is now tied to your servers, the internet, cloud computing. And so certainly for Elexicon, we have been heavily investing in cybersecurity and cyber resiliency, training our teams. I'm sure this is the same across most utilities. I think from a customer standpoint, I think what's key is where Mike had started at the very beginning, is that we have the trust of our customers now. And so we're not trying to earn their trust, but obviously having that trust already with you, it's an instant and that trust is gone. So, and we know that with investments in technology, we're also becoming data companies. Like, data is key, data is king, or queen, moving forward. And that also leads to privacy-related exposures. So we're investing heavily in cybersecurity. What I can tell you is that we're behind, because we will always be behind. Nefarious actors will always be further ahead of us, because it's what they do. But continuing to invest in cybersecurity will be, it's one of our top risks. It paralyzes me with fear. Having taken this role, I was worried about safety in a way that I never thought I'd be concerned about safety, even though for more than a dozen years I've worried about the safety of our employees from an executive perspective. But safety is paramount, and now so is cybersecurity, and not having a ransomware attack, which loops back to safety. Because, why do nefarious actors attack healthcare systems or hospitals? Because of the immediacy of the impact to people. And the same is true of an attack on, God forbid, an attack on a distribution system, because you could actually do immediate harm to people. So heavily investing in both of these items for sure, but recognizing that we will constantly have to evolve what we're doing, because it will forever be a game of catch-up.
The only other thing I might add on that is that as we are modernizing our distribution grids, most of us are putting, you know, a smart meter at every customer endpoint, and we're putting SCADA devices out on our distribution systems, and so we will end up with, I don't know, if you have 1 million customers, you have 1 million new entry points into your system by a nefarious actor. So that, you know, that's something that's a little bit sobering and new for us, that, you know, we could, you know, while we're doing all these very needed and important things, we need to do it in a way that we are not, you know, exposing ourselves to more risk. And so like Indy, I think all utilities are hypersensitive to cybersecurity risks as we move forward, and need to continue to be.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think the other thing we, as utilities, are doing is getting prepared and developing playbooks and working together, which as an industry is maybe a lot different than other industries, let's say like the oil and gas sector. But as electric utilities, because of the interconnectedness of our grids, having joint exercises, working on mock issues together, taking real issues that have happened and translating them into a game day, and having our people actually execute against what actually happened to try to prevent it a second time. That's important, and we're working on that all the time. We continue to build defense in depth and continue to invest in cyber defensive strategies that and platforms that will help us. And this will never be over because there is, I use the word army again, there's armies of people out there that are trying to break down the wall and get into our IT systems and into our operational technology side as well. But I think we've been very, very strong over the past number of years. We'll continue to work hard to make sure we don't have a vulnerability somewhere in our grid. But this is something that continual investment, increased dollars each and every year. It's going to be with us for a long time. It's like the sustainment capital. It's like the infrastructure, right? The stuff that was built in the 40s and 50s is now changing, but gosh, we've still been adding hundreds of millions of dollars each and every year as we build out new infrastructure. So that issue will never, never go away. You'll never be done fixing or replacing infrastructure. It's with us forever. It's part of our cost of doing business out there. And even our utility, we're spending almost $1 billion a year on infrastructure in the province, and that will continue. And if we get into the electrification side, that you could see that number increase substantially over the next decade.
Okay, well, thank you. That's all the questions we had, so we are going to open it up to the room if you have any questions for our panelists.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes, so we can take a couple of questions. Oh yeah, well, if there's Francis here, Julia.
I always have a question. Thank you very much. Thank you for that panel. Every year when we have the CEO's panel, there's somebody that asks the question, what is it that keeps you up at night? And I always leave depressed after that. So I want to ask you a different question this time, and that is, what's the one thing when looking to the future? And we heard all about all of the challenges and the barriers and so on. But when looking to the future, what's the one thing that you're really optimistic and really looking forward to, as opposed to the one thing that's actually keeping you up and scaring the daylights out of you?
Well, I started with.
It can't be the bar.
It can't be the bar.
The bar is still exciting. Let's not debate that. But since I started with what's keeping me up at night, maybe I'll add what I'm excited about. I mean, it's a good problem to have, electrification and the need for or use of your fuel. Like that's a great problem for us to be solving for. The challenge, of course, is the how, but I think it was said amongst us that we're going to get there. We always do. And it's a great problem to have in the context of, and there's an environmental and social benefit to using our fuel as well. So it's not even that we're pushing for the use of electricity. It's that everybody else is pushing for the use of electricity as well. So, where we sit as a monopoly, it's a good problem for people to want to take your product. So I'm excited about it. The how we get there and the amount of investment tied back to affordability is forever the question, but we'll figure that out as well. That's working with policymakers and our regulator. And I think Melanie had made a comment earlier. I mean, I think the last piece is that we need the interplay between federal, provincial, municipal governments and our regulator, because everybody's pushing for net zero, but as you said, there's no mandate back to our regulators. And so there needs to be that unified view of everybody's got that target in mind, but it needs to also translate to the regulator and not just us trying to serve our communities. But it's exciting. I'm excited about it.
I feel like we might all have the same answer, Francis. Just a hunch. But yeah, I think we as an industry are moving from a very kind of traditional type of business that hasn't changed for 100 years to just like exponential change in a very short time. And 2030 is not far away. It's only 8 years from now, and by 2040 and 2050, I don't know, will we even be regulated the way we are today? What will we look like? And I think we're very lucky and blessed to be here during a time where we get to live through that and we get to lead through that change.
I think one of the big things is it makes this industry really cool. Can I say that at my age? I can say that's really cool. Young guys and women who are coming into the business, I caught myself real quick, didn't I? Traditionally it's been a male industry. Let's face it. But we, all our organizations now are building out our diversity categories. We're looking to have organizations that represent the communities, and people are looking at the electricity industry with a different lens now, and they're saying, "Wow, if everything's going to be electric, that means." That's going to be a good place to work. There's going to be lots of innovation. There's going to be lots of need for people that have energy and skill sets that we can put to work, and that's absolutely right. In the past, utilities were sometimes looked at, well, that old stodgy utility, why would you want to work there? I'll go work for Google or somebody else. But I think that the tide is changing. And the last point that Indy made on the regulator, I think when it comes to the speed at which some of the regulations are coming at us, and mostly federally, I would suggest, requires that the federal government, those who make the rules, should also pay for some of the things that they're asking utilities across the country to do. It's a big ask to, even for utilities that are 95, 98% clean today, to go that extra mile. And it's important that funding is there to move the dial if they want it moved in the timeline that they want it. What keeps me up at night is this urgency and the speed at which things seem to be happening and the expectation that it will happen. But the reality is that technology needs to come of age. It needs to be an economic model and an economic business case that presents itself before utilities will make that investment decision. And that will always be the case. And so that's going to require some time, some energy, but some commitment where those that regulate certain things out of existence or new things into existence, how can we change? If you want to move the dial that fast, then let's pony up some money and make sure we can all do that.
I've seen a few hands, but we just have time for one last question. But I think our panelists will be sticking around for dinner, I hope. So any other questions, I think you can find them after. So go ahead.
Okay, this is probably going to start with Melanie, and I hate to go back to what keeps you up at night, because that's generally what an operator does. Melanie, we didn't really mention it at all, and it's probably the last comment, but competition, sort of an Alberta kind of perspective. Do you worry about that and keep it up at night as we're thinking about these new innovations and pricing signals? And then maybe I'll offer it to Ontario, and Mike will probably look last to you on competition in Saskatchewan.
Well, I will say the thing that does keep me up at night the most is health and safety. our employees. And I would echo what Indy said around that's, it's something, when somebody gets injured in your company and it's serious and it could have, it had serious injury, serious fatality potential, it's a punch in the gut, and you just, it's truly what keeps me up at night. But competition, that's a big one. That's an interesting one for us as utilities, because we, for over 100 years got very comfortable without competition. You only have one wire going to your house, and you're going to use it, and you pay your bill, and you're generally pretty happy about that as long as the lights are on most of the time. But I think, going forward, I talked a bit about how the demarcation point of the meter, I don't think that is forever going to be that way. I think it's going to get a little bit gray as to what's regulated and what's not, and regulations will have to change over time. And there are competitors in there. So if I don't give you a smart meter and give you a report on your bill with your home energy use and show you how you can operate your dishwasher differently so that you can pay less and reduce your emissions, if I don't do that, like Google's going to knock on your door, and is going to do that for you, and will show you how you can pay your utility less, and I'm now cut out of that picture entirely. So absolutely, that is very top of mind, that we need to kind of think about that as our business model does evolve, on how do we stay relevant. And we have earned the trust of our customers, and we do have that relationship with our customers, and they know us and they want us there. But it takes deliberate effort to keep that as you're being disrupted from all sides.
To Ontario, I would say that competition is obviously a concern, but I think more concerning for me about competition is that it's no longer the same group of key competitors that we have been, kind of traditionally considering, okay, well, if the monopoly was to fall away, who's competing against us? So it's the Googles of this world, but it's also my next door neighbor. And so that's very hard to get your head around. And I'm not sure how deep a penetration we have right now of those kinds of prosumers, but that is what democratization is all about. And then it becomes both a twofold question, one of managing against that competition, staying relevant, but it's also then, how do I continue to deliver the best customer experience to my customer? Because over the last 20 years, let's say, we went from far more static as a utility to kind of coming of age into the 2000s and 2010s into 2020 and beyond, where customer experience is now central to the products and services that we do deliver and are going to deliver in the future, certainly in order to continue to stay relevant, provide ancillary services, et cetera. So it's a combination between competition with my customer, competition with non-traditional actors, and then delivering an exemplary customer experience all the while.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said, and I think competition has been around us for quite some time. Even as a Crown utility, we view anything and anybody that is taking revenue away from us as a threat to our business. And when you have large industrial customers now that have the deep pockets and the access to capital, who can go out and build behind the fence and can generate themselves, we lose revenue. That's and once you lose a customer to a self-generation program, it's going to be a long time before you get them back. So again, that's why we have to be mindful about affordability. If our rates go too high, it just creates more of a push for them to want to look at self-generation. So, and the small customer, your next door neighbor, putting solar on the roof. It's the same issue, just smaller. But as utilities, we can't block people from accessing the grid. Again, to be democratic about it, we have to provide a level playing field, and it's up to us to provide appropriate price signals, and then people can make their choice. And that's what it's all about.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks to our CEO panelists for sharing your experiences. That was fantastic. And thanks again to Adriana and MNP for your support of Powering Partnerships this year. OK. So, Susannah Pierce, présidente nationale et directrice générale de Nouvelles Énergies et Solutions Canada à Shell Canada, sera la prochaine et la dernière à présenter cet après-midi. Our final speaker of this afternoon's session is Susannah Pierce, President and Canada Country Chair from Shell Canada. Susannah has held senior positions in the energy and technology sectors in Canada, the United States, and Europe, most recently as Director of Corporate Affairs for LNG Canada. She joined LNG Canada in 2013 as a Shell secondee and has been responsible for the project's federal and provincial regulatory approvals, Indigenous relations, government relations, media relations, and community communications. So under her leadership, the project achieved federal and provincial environmental approvals on schedule and also received unprecedented support from First Nations, communities, and governments. Prior to joining LNG Canada, Susannah served as Vice President of Value Chain Integration for Shell Canada. So please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Okay, and as I understand it, I think I'm standing between you and cocktails, is that right? You've been here all afternoon? Let's see how this goes. I do have written remarks. Typically, I like to walk around and speak, but in this new role, I'm trying to confine my remarks to at least some prepared scripts, but then I'm also happy to get into more of a conversation with you. So first off, yes, I'm Susannah Pierce. I'm President and Country Chair of Shell. I've been in this position now since the beginning of April, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin, the Anishinaabe, and I'm in good health and good spirits, and all of you here today I can see, and I hope are as well. And I appreciate your attention, because I feel as though I work for a company that lives up to my values, and I hope will live up to societal values. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what that means today. Before I do, is everybody hearing me okay? Because I'm getting some feedback. We're good? Okay. Yeah, we're good? Okay. There we go. Is that all right? You know what? It's my cell phone. Somebody really wants to meet me. Hello? Okay. Starting over. Okay. So I have been on seat now since April. But if we all collectively think about how the world has accelerated just in the last few months, doesn't it really feel like we are in the middle of a treadmill that somebody's turned up pretty rapidly, where we're facing so many different transitions all at the same time? And I think each one of us has experienced that in our professions, and I would argue in our personal lives. And from a Shell perspective, we're experiencing that as a company, as you can well tell. And if you followed our company over the last years, you may have seen how we are transitioning as a company. And the interesting thing about Shell as a company and as it relates to Canada is Canada very much reflects the global portfolio that Shell is pursuing. In fact, we have all of our businesses for the Shell Group in Canada. And that makes it quite exciting because we have the ability to maximize the opportunities between the businesses as we look to decarbonize. Now, as you've heard, Shell, or may have heard, Shell has a fairly, I'd say, aggressive and ambitious net zero climate commitment. We have laid that climate commitment out in a strategy that we announced earlier this year called Powering Progress. And Powering Progress is really focused on 4 pillars, the first of which is to generate shareholder value. We still need to do that for our shareholders, which, by the way, I was very surprised to learn when I took this on. A lot of that shareholder value also goes to a large number of pensioners who depend upon us to continue to generate the revenue to meet those pensions. It also requires that we power lives, and powering lives is not only about providing power, clean power, but it's also looking at how do we ensure that we are maximizing opportunities for communities, Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, that we are advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion not only within our house, within Shell, but also outside of our house, in businesses that we choose to work with. It also means that we are respecting nature, because I think we all recognize more so than ever that our natural resources are limited if we're not careful in how we use them, and that biodiversity is absolutely crucial and also plays an important role in addressing climate. And the other 4th part of that strategy is the one I'm really going to talk to you today, which is about meeting net zero. So net zero really is the target at the heart of our Powering Progress strategy. And it supports the more ambitious goal under Paris, which is to achieve or to mitigate, to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius climate change, to avoid going any higher than 1.5 from industrial levels. By definition, getting to net zero is not something Shell can realize alone, and I'll explain why in a minute. Society as a whole needs to act together and must act now. To understand how best to address our emissions, we first need to know how much we are generating and where these emissions come from. Shell defines and measures its emissions using the globally accepted greenhouse gas protocol, which categorizes emissions as scope 1, 2, and 3. I expect most of you are familiar with its categorization, so I don't need to spend a lot of time going through that. But I think the important thing to take away here is that we are accounting for scope 1, 2, and 3. And so when you hear about net zero commitments, understand what they mean. From a Shell perspective, scope 1 and 2 is relatively, not really easy, but it is within our control. Scope 3, however, are our customers' emissions. That's a little bit harder. And when you really consider our footprint, 90% of those emissions we need to address under net zero come from our customers. So that's not going to be all that easy. And when you consider our overall greenhouse gas footprint, take a minute, it's about 1.7 gigatons of CO2 per year. That's our peak. We have peaked. That's including scope 1 and 2 and 3. Now we must go down from there. So clearly we need to be working with our customers and society to do that. So when we think about doing that, I want to spend a minute just talking a little bit about what we are focusing on. So when we talk about scope 1 and 2 in the Canadian context, clearly we're talking about the operational emissions that come from our facilities, as well as from the power that we would procure. So within Canada, we're lucky to have the Scotford Chemicals and Energies Park. That's one of only 5 designated parks that Shell will be investing in to help meet the future climate demands and lower carbon fuels. It's also a park which you may have seen that we've made recent announcements to invest in renewable power, where we'll be purchasing power from the Blue Hills Wind Project, and we recently announced a commitment to Silicon Ranch to develop 58 megawatts of solar power, again, to feed that facility. That will be about 20% of the refinery's needs. When we also think about scope 1 and 2, we're also thinking about carbon capture sequestration. And I don't know if there was a lot of discussion about that today, but I can say with confidence that that is a technology that is proven, and it is a technology that is critical. And so for us, at Scotford, we've been operating the Quest facility, which is now, over its 6 years, captured about 6 million tons of carbon emissions. We recently announced the Polaris CCS project, and that project is in 2 phases, but it's incredibly ambitious, yet incredibly exciting. The first phase would capture about 750,000 tons from our hydrogen cracker, as well as from our chemicals plant. And then the second phase would capture approximately 10 million tons per annum under the Alberta proposal to create a hub. It's fantastic to see, and I would say that Alberta is fantastic to see this happen. We know because Alberta has the largest emissions in the country, but it also has the advantage of this geological reservoir, which again we have proven and we believe will support significant carbon capture sequestration. So if I spend a minute now just talking a little bit about scope 3, because I think that's crucial. In the context of this conversation, you're probably very interested in understanding how do we address scope 3 as it relates to our customers' emissions. Now we have to look at our customers specifically, and this is a really important part of our strategy that I think is a game changer and an accelerator. And what I mean by that is over the last years, we have been able to produce lower carbon fuels. We could have installed EV charging. The difference is customers were not looking for it. So we have, within our strategy, really focused on working from the customer back, sitting down with our largest customers, and there's many, and saying, what would it take for you to get to net zero? Because the interesting thing is these customers, many of them, want to get to net zero. Or if they're retail customers, they want to understand how they can decarbonize their footprint. It is a game changer, and we haven't really seen that happen until recently. So that will help accelerate us, or accelerate the ambition and the opportunity to align on how do we get there. But working across sectors is absolutely crucial, and why is that? Because each sector is going to be different. You talked a little bit about electrification. Well, electrification will suit certain sectors. Lower carbon fuels, first and second generation biofuels, which we will produce at Scotford, will suit certain sectors. Sustainable aviation fuel will suit the airlines, but the airlines need to have the planes that can take 100% of it. Hydrogen, we talked a little bit about that, or I heard some conversation about that this morning. We're very bullish on hydrogen, blue and green. We're a bit agnostic, because in the Canadian context, guess what? Blue makes more sense in some places, like Alberta. Green makes more sense in other places, like in Ontario and British Columbia. From a power perspective, however, the important thing here is to really pay attention to the power price as an input, because it is a key input into the implementation of hydrogen projects, as is, again, the relationship with customers. So as we look at hydrogen in this country, what you will see happening, and I hope we'll see happening, is a great combination and coordination between customers, policymakers and regulators, and producers such as ourselves, and ultimately, as it relates to green hydrogen utilities. But that must happen, because in the absence of that, we are not going to be able to address a lot of those gaps and the constraints that then can help us accelerate these projects while ensuring that we're keeping the cost of these projects and its impact to consumers as low as possible. And again, I know that there was a lot of discussion about the end user and the consumer, and I think we all have seen and witnessed and even experienced the impact of supply and demand. And so for each one of us involved in this industry, we need to put customers and consumers, which by the way happen to be you and me, at the core of that. And that is, again, where government and policy comes into play, where they can work with businesses like us and utilities like you, and on a sectoral basis, again, identify where those constraints are, what the green premiums may be, and how we might address those. Because again, I think as we all recognize, if consumers and customers are impacted significantly with price, it will slow down our ability to decarbonize. And this ultimately, the ability to provide affordable and reliable energy while decarbonizing in an accelerated fashion, which we need to do, is truly the most incredible challenge that I think we all face. And that is where we need to spend our attention. Now again, taking a step back, as I think about what else do we need to be thinking about, I'd like to just spend a second talking about the role of Canada in meeting global climate commitments. Because I firmly believe that as Canadians, we do need to do our part to meet the climate commitments in front of us. And why do we need to do that? Because it's very difficult then, if we haven't done as much as we can, to stand up and say, well, you got to do yours. I think we all acknowledge that. If we as Canadians are not doing our part to meet our climate commitments, we can't go proselytize to other countries that are large emitters and say, you must meet your climate commitments. So how do we do that? What we need to do here is we do need to progress climate commitments as much as we possibly can, but then we also need to look at how can we enable other countries to decarbonize by exports, exporting lower carbon products, as well as exporting clean tech, and where we can, leveraging the Paris Agreement under Article 6. Now, for those that are not familiar with Article 6 essentially enables carbon trading between countries. So it's more efficient to invest in a decarbonization opportunity in another country. You might have the ability to get that carbon credit back. It's basically being able to exchange one NDC for the other. It's a crucial part of what I think we need to do, not only to incentivize foreign investment, but also to enable us to help meet global climate change commitments. So again, when I think about the role of Shell, and I think about it in the context of Canada, Canada really has many opportunities to help Shell meet its net zero commitments, but then also Shell to help Canada meet its net zero commitments. It starts from the customer back. It includes a sectoral approach, recognizing that each sector will require different types of energy. It requires coordination across government, stakeholders, including communities and Indigenous communities who do need to be at the table, who do need to have a share and a say. And it requires that we put and take down the barriers that we previously have always had. I know that there's probably been lots of conversation here in this room, or different conversations in different parts, about how do we better interconnect the grids? How do we make more efficient investments in one province that could actually help decarbonize emissions in another? I think it's time we need to really revisit these conversations. And I think I'm hearing a little bit about that, but we really need to put everything on the table. Because if we're truly serious about meeting these commitments, then everything does need to be on the table. The sacred cows need to be addressed. We need to do it as utilities, we need to do it as companies, we need to do it as stakeholders, we need to do it as governments. Because I'm pretty sure, for any of you that have children, you're not just doing it because you believe you need to do it for your company. In my company, I believe I need to do it for my company because I see a market opportunity in doing it. But really what's making me do this is I do also have children. And I know many would like to think, or many have suggested, that people like Greta Thunberg, oh, don't want to listen to her. Well, the fact of the matter is, our children are scared. I know mine are. Because it doesn't take much to truly consider, if we do see a significant change in climate, how difficult life could be. I live in BC, and I also spend quite a bit of time in Calgary. And so I have been right in the middle of some of these atmospheric rivers. Now, there's a lot of things that have contributed to what's just happened there. But it is a foreshadowing of what we need to prepare for. So again, as a company, I am motivated to do what I can to meet, or as somebody who works in this company, motivated to do what I can to help meet our climate commitments, because they're ambitious, but I believe we have pathways to do it. But as a Canadian, I'm motivated to do that within this country. And I'm doing it because I believe this country can do it by working together. But I'm also, most importantly, doing it as a mother, because I do believe our children deserve to have a future, and I do believe they deserve to have a future in this country, to be living the lives as well as we have had the opportunity to do so. So with that, did you know I didn't even really look at my remarks? I just spoke openly. I'm happy to take any questions and go back from how Shell is building its net zero strategy. Thank you.
Hi, Susannah. I actually a little bit hesitant that whether this is the right question to ask here. I want to use a metaphor. So do you think that in the future, very near future, we could see Shell as a company, like a tobacco company, put a sign on every Shell station to say, hey, you know fossil fuel here killing blah, blah, blah people every day, and consider alternatives when you can, or something like that. Like a tobacco company has to put a sign there and say, hey, smoke is harmful to your health. Because I see that, yeah, you've done a lot to help the net zero transition, but one hard fact is that you're still one of the oil and gas industry is still one of the most powerful industry in the world and most profitable industry in the world. How you deal with that sort of internal, I'm not sure whether it's an internal dilemma for you or not, but anyway.
It's a big dilemma. Yeah, no, it's a big dilemma, and it's a fair question. I think to your first point, will we put a little label on top of the pumps that say this is, climate-inducing energy? What we are doing instead of that in the interim is we are actually committing within Shell, or within Canada at all the Shell stations, to actually offset the emissions that you use through fossil fuels. So at this stage, no, we haven't put a label on our pumps, but we are looking at how do we include ways of offsetting when you use a petroleum product like that. What you'll also see, though, increasingly, it's electric vehicle charging at our stations, as well as hydrogen. So we're rolling out an EV charging network. In fact, the IV network in Ontario here will be using our Shell Recharge technologies. And then you'll also see us install more hydrogen pumps. So what we are trying to do, again, looking at Scope 3, while we're addressing our overall emissions, is try and make sure that we're offsetting where we have to, where we can't eliminate right away, until we get to a point of getting to net zero.
Thank you.
And just to your point, I think that the point you raise is really crucial, because for a big company like ours, and like this country, and this is where the parallels are so interesting, we know how much revenue we get from the incumbent energy system, because we know how prevalent it is. But we also know if we shut that down, and if we shut the industry down in Canada, well, then we've lost a lot of income that in turn can help fuel decarbonization. So there is a tightrope to walk. And I can't remember, it was a Total CEO who said, I need to be black to be green. I wouldn't use that expression, but I'm using it as an example to say that we need to enable a transition that leverages the revenues that we can generate today to invest in those new businesses while they scale up. Because this is the other thing, which I think companies like ours are very challenged with. The businesses that we need in the energy transition are not yet at scale. And why are they not yet at scale? Because customer demand is not yet at scale. But it is accelerating, and this is where the optimism comes in. A great example would be, just to your point, we've had 2 hydrogen refueling stations in Vancouver for the last few years. Guess how many people have gone up and fueled up to those stations? How many people? About 11, you're about right. Or something like that. So the key thing is, we can produce the energy, but if customers are not consuming it, and there's a variety of reasons why they may not be, then we've got a problem. This is the whole point of why we need to work together with other parts of society to make that transition. I don't know if you're going to like this figure, but I'll share it with you anyways. Shell, on the basis of our global footprint, supplies approximately 5% of global energy consumption in the world. So that is from the products that we produce and the products that we sell on behalf of others. Now, you can choose to look at that as 5% of the world's problem, or you could choose to look at that at 5% of the world's solution. And I, of course, like to look at it as the latter. And why do I do that? In part because of our footprint, because of our network, because of our customer base, we have those connections. We have the ability to sit down with some of the largest emitters in the world and say, what will it take? So that's what we're doing. And the other thing I think I should add too, I think there was a comment earlier about do oil and gas companies work together? Well, what's also pretty amazing right now is increasingly so. Why is that? Because like-minded oil and gas companies see right now we are faced with the same challenge. And going it alone is not going to help. If we can partner and accelerate investments in clean technologies, including things like carbon capture sequestration, we could actually have a shot of decarbonizing our footprint and serving our customers with lower carbon energy. The other thing I've seen happening, and worth referencing here, partnerships with companies like Enbridge. Again, Shell and Enbridge, like-minded companies. We came together and signed an MOU in September looking at, well, where are our synergies from a demand, a load perspective, and an infrastructure perspective? Because if I need to decarbonize my scope 2, and Enbridge has the capacity to give me front of meter, maybe I'll work with them. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning to this group too is that Shell provides currently about 230 terawatt hours of power globally today. We intend to double that by 2030. Now, as we look at how do we incentivize and accelerate green power in this country, we really need to look at how can we enable companies that have customer relationships to expand those into markets here. Because then you're getting the efficiencies of that customer and being able to provide PPAs directly to them regardless of the market. So again, I think there's lots of opportunities, but I think the theme of this speech is really to say we need to look end to end. We need to look from the customer back. We need to look across sectors because each sector will require different pathways to decarbonize. But the optimistic message is it is happening because customers are increasingly asking for it. And that then creates, I think, the new ability for us to really work the frameworks to meet our climate commitments.
So you mentioned Article 6 of the Paris Accord earlier, and I'm just curious, because I have no idea how to figure this out. I know that in terms of carbonization, like a lot of the fuel Shell creates, like extracts in Canada, isn't used locally, just economics and doesn't make sense to build a refinery here. But how does that work across regulatory structures? Because I know there's some countries that, quite frankly, don't care, or they're too poor to care. How does Shell account for that?
Can you just clarify a bit for me? Shell account for?
Well, in terms of like net zero neutrality, how does it account for like different regulatory schemes or, just some countries not giving a damn?
Well, I guess we have the ability to account, well, some countries don't give a damn. So I guess the question is, does Shell give a damn if a country doesn't give a damn? Well, I think Shell does, in part because we have this net zero commitment, which is pretty clear, net zero by 2050. And it also means that, and in fact, you might have heard that recently we announced we will halve our absolute emissions from Scope 1 and 2 under our operational control by 2030. So regardless of what country we're in, we still have these net zero commitments, which are, borderless. As it relates, though, I think to a question you were trying to get at as well on Article 6, the whole point of Article 6 is you need willing countries willing to get into an exchange conversation. This is where trade becomes very, very important. The LNG Canada project, which is a project I came from, which some of you may be familiar with, but I also think allows us to learn a few things from it, produces liquefied natural gas at the lowest carbon intensity of any large LNG facility operating in the world today. Now, if you were to take that natural gas, that liquefied natural gas, and then export it to China, and then China would then take that LNG and back out coal-fired power plants, and you saw a reduction in emissions, the question would be, could Canada then capture that reduction, presuming that it's much more significant than any emissions increase over here? That is what Article 6 essentially can help address. But indeed, it requires two countries willing to do it and a willingness for them to trade across their NDCs. It's typically easier where a country is much more advanced and close to meeting it in their willingness to trade with others that are not. But I think we'll see how it plays out, because in a world today, we need these kinds of markets to really drive investments in decarbonization where they make the most sense. But then I also believe that if a country is investing in another country to help that country decarbonize because it makes more sense there, whether it's CCS or nature-based systems, then could there be an exchange? I think there should be, and that's where Article 6 comes in.
And what role do you see Shell playing in this?
I think we can help identify these projects. I think there's a very important role to play. I think we play a role in also helping to say, well, what are the actual emissions reductions that might come from a technology, or that might come from, a distribution of LNG and things like that. So from a commercial perspective, the private player perspective, I think we can help governments define what those protocols are. This is a quiet group for so late in the afternoon. You're just ready to go, aren't you?
Thank you for a terrific overview. I also particularly like your example of an Article 6 challenge, because that's usually people use fairly easy ones. That's a really good challenging one, right? Reducing from coal to natural gas in China using Canadian LNG, and who gets the credit. But no, I actually wanted to ask you something about offsets, because you mentioned offsets. I'd be interested to hear your perspectives on the importance of offsets, the kinds of offsets that Shell is thinking of, and also, are offsets a transition, or are they in part of the world post-2050?
Yeah, it's a great question. So offsets, as we think about them, is really offsets using nature. Okay, so we call it nature-based systems. And the way that we look at it is that first you need to avoid emissions, and then where you can, you need to mitigate them, and then if necessary, you need to capture them through technology or nature-based systems. We're looking at a variety of different types of nature-based systems outside of the technology solution, which is CCS. We're looking at everything from forestry to grasslands, seaforestation, a whole bunch of other different types of offset projects. The key thing, though, and this is where the protocols need to be strong and consistent, is that we need to make sure that those are in place so that these emissions reductions are verifiable and credible. But we do see a role for them, and we do see a role for them particularly in this short term where we don't have a lot of control over scope 3. Okay, so if we need to meet climate commitments by a certain point in time and the technology is not turned over fast enough, if there's an ability to invest in offsets today, which can be additional, that's key. The other thing for us, I think in the Canadian context, is the offsets policies need to be fungible. And this is really important because I think each province has different natural assets. There's different abilities for offset projects to be more effective in one province versus the other. Similarly, just as a province has natural assets for hydropower versus natural gas, again, we need to make sure that these offsets are fungible so that they can be tradable, and that's another element that we think is really crucial. it's a doctor, I'm in trouble now, right? Don't talk to me about hydrogen, we might get into it, you know?
Yeah, just a great presentation. Can you comment about the role of R&D? Shell invests more in R&D than a lot of companies, and how much of that is a pathway forward? And I'm thinking as a research professor, I'm always pro-research, but research takes a while, has some challenges. Can you just comment how that fits in with the grand plans, either here or globally?
Oh, it's fundamental, and I think you're seeing even more so. It's the R&D, but it's also how we then move the R&D through the development cycle and technology development cycle. We announced just a couple of days ago that Shell Ventures will be investing $1.4 billion in each part of the ecosystem, the development cycle, for technology and in part in R&D. We're also partnering with a number of universities, and we recently announced a new investment in British Columbia in the Clean Innovation, Clean Energy Center, which is essentially $35 million we'll put into the first 5 years, which is also matched by the federal and provincial governments. And if anybody else wants to contribute, you're more than welcome to. But the whole point of this is also to act as an incubator, also to invite different types of ideas to advance and commercialize and scale up technologies. We also just announced just yesterday, and this is outside of our own R&D, but it's contributing to it, that we're going to be a part of Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. Okay? And that, again, is where you see companies coming together with significant investment to accelerate the development of new technologies to address climate and scale them to a point of public acceptance. Does that help address your question? Okay, cool. I got 2 thumbs up from, so that must be good, right? I always get scared by doctors. All right, well, I enjoy being able to spend just a little bit of time with you. It's great to be a part of this conversation. I guess, again, in closing, what I would say, and I know that all of us like to think it can't happen, I think we have to go into this believing it can. Because if we don't, we won't try. And the key thing is, no matter your politics, no matter where you're from, at the end of the day, we're all people. And I think we all care for each other. I think we all want a better future for our kids. So it's time for us to remove those old things that have held us back, to take another look at some of those old problems, because we don't have a lot of time to make a real impact. So I hope each of you will leave here today and think about what you can do. Thank you.
Susannah doesn't see me up here, but I just want to say thank you very much. We're extremely happy you were able to join us today. That was a great talk. Susannah, we have a couple points of interest, common interest. Number one, you know, the oil and gas industry, and Shell in particular, produces products that the world needs. All of us in the electricity sector also produces a product that the world needs, and we aren't going away. And it's up to us to find a solution to this problem. And we will. It's going to take time. It's going to take innovation. It's going to take a lot of bright minds working on this. Second point of interest, you talked about family, and you talked about your daughter. I have 2 granddaughters. One is 10 and the other is 13. And about 2 years ago, the 10-year-old, who was then 8, had come home from school, and you know, they learn lots of things in school, and this little 8-year-old looked at me and she said, "Papa, why are you still burning coal in coal plants?" I said, "Well, you know, do you know that power that we make keeps those lights on and allows your iPad to get plugged in, and you can watch TV and do all the things that you need to do?" "Yeah, but why are you burning coal? It's so dirty." So I had to think about that for a bit, and you know, talk about what we're doing in the future to clean it up and what we're going to be doing. I also went out and bought her a little book called The Carbon Atom. Helped explain it in kids' terms. It's a really good little book. But you know, just to your point, it's all about that next generation, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. We want to have a safe planet, we want to have a clean planet, and we want to have a good place for our families to grow up. So with that, thank you again. Great speech, and we hope you can stay for a little while. If not, thank you very much on behalf of the Canadian Electricity Association. Thank you.